It's the guts and it's the glory. 100 stripes, 100 stories. It's the Pledge of Allegiance on the 4th of July. It's them handwritten letters from home. It's them sleepless nights alone. It's his newborn baby he left with his wife. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down, here's a line. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes. Hey. From the fields of Indiana to the swamps of Louisiana, to the golden coast of California, Uncle Sam's the only family he's got. His purple heartbeat won't stop, and his 18th birthday was the day he was born. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down, here's a line. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes.
What is up, Rio Hondo Prep football fans? Happy 4th of July to everyone out there across the great land that is the United States of America. It is the 250th birthday of the greatest country on the history in the history of the planet. Man, I never thought. Well, I've been planning this out a long time. That's all I will say. This celebration of America, this celebration of someone very special to the Rio Hondo Prep football program. It's been about 2 years in the works, honestly. I've kept it quiet. I've talked to some people about it, but I really wanted it to be this year also, the 250th anniversary of our American independence. Sorry, Brits, you guys got to work tomorrow or today, whatever day is off. We will be celebrating all weekend long. Happy birthday, America, USA. USA. For those not watching, I got my Jack Hughes hockey jersey on, hockey sweater from the Olympic team. And as a friendly reminder to our friends up north, the Canadians, 2-1 gold medal game, USA. No big deal. Just a friend, just letting it out there. I know it's hardly ever happened. So we are celebrating it still. And, I know the World Cup is going on. I'm actually recording on a day where that's going on still. So when this comes out, I think hopefully the U.S. will still be playing. They look good in their first game at SoFi a week or so ago. But man, every year I look forward to this episode in so many ways, just because it's been an opportunity to talk to Bill Lee from the Marine Corps, Benjamin Jacobs, Navy SEAL, last year Don Mosier, who served in Vietnam, and he knew he coached so many of last year's seniors when they were in care. So it was kind of fitting having him on here, hearing his story. And today we're going to hear the story, literally, of Gary Lunney, Sergeant Gary Lunney. Many of us knew him as Coach Lunney, Mr. Lunney in the classroom, defensive coordinator at Rio Hondo Prep for quite some time. And if you recognize the last name, if you don't, know who Mr. Lunney is, he is the father of Ginger Demers, who teaches at Rio, Lindy Joe, who is a teacher at Rio, and of course Tim Lunney, a teacher at Rio. So the connections run deep there. The fourth son, Robert Lunney, was played a couple of years ahead of me. So I think 4 years ahead of me. I was a senior. I was a freshman when he was a senior. So Robert Lunney, closest to me in age of everyone else, but I kind of got together with the Lunney family. I pitched them an idea a couple months ago that I wanted to do here on the 4th of July episode. We talk about Coach Lunney a lot, right? I didn't have the privilege to play for him that long. I was more of that junior high kid. Would always talk to Mr. He'd be a 7th grade teacher, right? He'd be teaching Latin. He'd be teaching junior high choir. But then he was also this defensive coordinator, this defensive mastermind, statistician, just a master classman as far as scouting goes. And when you think of 8-man football, you don't think of defense necessarily. But back in those days, it was a little tighter games than the blowouts and high-scoring affairs you see now. But Coach Lunney was just a unique individual. And as I was in high school, freshman into sophomore year, there was a transition going on. He was slowly, stepping away, retiring. He was more of a defensive consultant to Greg Loomis, who was taking over as the defensive coordinator. A changing of the guard, and it was not easy following Mr. Gary Lunney's footsteps, but for the you that played under Mr. Lunney, you guys know how unique he was. The little catchphrases he would say, if you weren't paying attention, he'd be like, boom, you're gone. You just died. You're done in Vietnam. You wouldn't be coming home. Or, he would, he just had a way about him. He just had a way about him that he would, a unique coaching method, hit him with your purse next time. He knew how to tear you down, but then bring you back up, right? In the best way possible. The isn't football fun? The slap on the back, just his smile. It was as relentless as his defensive tactics. And I'd walk by him as a seventh grader all the time, and he'd pull out the scouting report. He'd show me. He'd be like, this team, man, they're fast and they're really big. And did I say they're fast? He's just a wonderful man. And we're going to hear his story quite literally today. This is going to be a long podcast, but I think in honor of the 250th birthday of America, I thought it was rather fitting. Mr. Gary Lunney wrote a book, Duty Calls. It's about 70 pages long. I think there's all the chapters are very short, like 3 or 4 pages. There's 20 chapters or whatever. So we're going to go through this book today, word by word. If you've ever seen the Jocko Willink podcast, basically he reads biographies or stories from different soldiers on the ground. And that's kind of where I got the idea, because truth be told, I'm like, does anyone really want to sit and watch me reading a book? What's that going to look like? Well, it is just going to be me reading a book here, but with my gear and everything. And we're going to go slow. It's just going to take some time because I'm going to read, hit pause, share a few things with you as it's going on. But I thought more than anything else, this would be an opportunity to be almost like an audio book. For those that never got to read this book or maybe wanted to read it again. It is hard to find. I had to borrow it from Ginger Demers, formerly Ginger Lunney. And so she's been a big help with this. All 4 of the Lunney children have been a big contributor to this show that we're going to see today, and you will see why. Let me lay it out for you. I got to get into this. You don't want to hear me, my USA spiel too much more. Again, tying in service and patriotism. You look at our football team every Friday night. Coach Carson's adamant about this, winning the national anthem. You stand at attention, hand over your heart, numerical order. No one does it better than Rio Hondo. The flag on the back of your helmet. There are things, and there's nothing fake about it. Coach Carson constantly talks about different warriors throughout our history, and our players go in with that, warrior battle mentality at all times. And it just, you want to remember and pay tribute to those who've gone and done that. And we're going to hear about Mr. Lunney's deployment to Vietnam. We heard from Mr. Mosier last year and his experience. I would say Mr. Lunney's is a little more intense, and we got a little bit more of he saw some serious action. And not to say Mr. Mosier didn't or Mr. Drain didn't. I think what Mr. Lunney went through, most leaders will tell you, was rather significant. He got there basically right after the Tet Offensive, and not to do a huge history lesson here, but things were pretty spicy, pretty spicy over there at the time. So you're going to hear all about it from today from Gary Lunney, his words. By now I've shared some social media, pictures and things. I'll try to get as many of those out as possible. But throughout this podcast, my original plan was every few chapters, play a video from one of his children, the Lunney family, the Robert, Ginger, Lindy, and Tim. Well, what I ended up going with, what we're going to do instead, Tim had an idea, an approach, and I thought it was actually really fitting. So we're going to hear from Robert, Ginger, and Lindy to start things off. Just 5-minute videos or maybe 7-minute videos of them talking about their dad. And then we're going to go into the book. We're going to start reading it one by one. Again, this will be a long podcast. If it's under 2 hours or 2.5 hours, I'll be happy. In real time, it's probably a lot longer than that. But we're just going to pause and do what we got to do here to make this a really quality 4th of July podcast here for our Charge to Keep audience. So I'm going to play those 3 videos. And then before every chapter, Tim basically describes the chapter, gives you a quick little summary about what transpires. So I thought that was kind of cool and his way to contribute throughout this thing. So we're going to hear from 3 of the Lunneys first. Then we'll dive into the book with Tim, me reading, and Tim, of course, doing a little description about each chapter beforehand. So I hope you guys enjoy this. My visions don't always come out as the best way possible, but I've been really excited about this for quite some time as a man that we all cherish, whether you were in junior high or in choir or, playing defensive line for Gary Lunney. He touched a lot of lives and in his own special, unique way. I know for many of the older alumni, I say older guys, probably 10 years older than me or older guys will really cherish this, I think, and hearing about Coach Lunney and, the Vietnam War. We're not going into all the details of that and everything. It's just those who served, man, those who answered the call, put the uniform on and went out into harm's way. You can't help but think of them on the 4th of July, as well as those that didn't make it home, whether it was Vietnam or World War II. All the Revolutionary War, 250 years ago, the Civil War, Iraq, Afghanistan, just World War I, like Korea, the Forgotten War. We owe such a debt of gratitude to those who've paid the ultimate price, and just for those that are willing. Sometimes, it's the book is duty calls. Mr. Lunney didn't volunteer to join up and serve. He was called. And he answered the call, like so many brave Americans have done. So I hope you see my vision today and can appreciate a very special man that we all love and look back, and he made a lot of us better. And I'm bummed that I didn't get to play, 4 years for him, as well as Coach Johnson. He was kind of retiring at that time also. So, but this is a little bit about Rio's past. We know how great the present and the future is with Coach Carson. Coach Carson played for Gary Lunney. I bet you he got a few defensive thoughts from Coach Lunney. So let's not talk anymore about it. Let's be about it, not talk about it. Let's dive into this. First things first, I want to play 3 videos for you, each about 5-7 minutes long. We're going to start with the eldest, Lindy Joe of the Lunney children. Let's start with her. Then we'll go to Robert Lunney, and then Ginger Demers. Those 3 videos. I'll say maybe a word or 2 in between each one. But Lindy Joe, you know her at Rio Hondo. She's also the wife of Harry Joe, who does the stats there on the sidelines. So let's start things off with her on this 4th of July and get things going here on the Charge to Keep podcast. Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Hi everyone, it's Lindy. I guess I'm here to talk about my dad. So I wrote something, so if you see me looking off to the side or something, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at my notes. I remember watching my dad, the pure passion of my dad that he had for his family and his friends and football. He worked himself to the bone for our family a lot of times. Sometimes he even had 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, but he still always found time for football. He was the defensive coordinator with Mr. Johnson, with Mr. Randall Johnson, and he loved football. We would spend hours watching football on TV. It didn't matter if it was high school, professional, college scouting videos. We would sit there doing his X's and O's and V's. I was probably the only 5 or 6 year old that could read a football playbook by the time I was in 1st or 2nd grade. But we had a lot of good times about football. He was a guy with 2 different sides. He had the big, gruff, scary, I guess you would say drill sergeant side of him, and you didn't cross that side of him ever. But he also had the big teddy bear, cuddly, silly, really a big jokester, really dry sense of humor. I can still hear sometimes during football games, I could hear this big giant booming voice yelling things like, hey, hit him with your purse next time, in case if somebody, missed a block or a tackle, or hey, sub my grandmother in for so-and-so, as if his grandma could have done a better job. Anyways, he always had that crazy sense of humor, and I always really loved that. Let's see, Army. Well, I'm gonna be honest and say my dad did not talk a lot about the Army. People always remember him talking, but he basically told the same stories over and over again. I think it's just a generational thing. He didn't like to think back to the time that he was in the Army. I know the things that he did while he was in the Army. He wrote music for the RHP trip plays. As a sergeant, he led platoons through jungles. He developed what he called dry rot in his legs. Years later, I was fooling around backstage. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and I had a cane and I was spinning it around, and I was having a great time just running around backstage with my dad at one of the plays, and I whacked him in the shin on accident. He was not thrilled. It gave him this big wound, I guess. But because of that dry rot, it got infected and it didn't heal for months and months. He lived with that for his whole life. Probably the story that scared me the most that he had told me was he was again leading a platoon, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of gunfire, and he heard the gunfire, and then all of a sudden he felt this blaze of heat go right past him, and it turned out a bullet had either grazed his head or his helmet, I don't remember which, and actually hit someone behind him. It's a sobering thought to think that had he been over a centimeter or two, none of the Lunneys would be here. That's kind of a crazy thought. Anyways, some of the more happy things that I remember about my dad, I connected with my dad mostly through music. We both loved music. It's how we expressed it ourselves, through teaching, just through the love of music itself and the emotion that comes with that. I don't know what the average dad did, honestly, growing up, but I know what our dad did. Our dad would come home after, again, his 2 or 3 jobs and his volunteering and everything else that he did, and he would sit and watch us put on shows. We would sing, dance, act, do all sorts of things. Tim would do magic tricks, things like that, and he would sit there. I'm sure he was exhausted, but he did it anyways, and he loved it. The other thing that I really loved was he and I would just sit at the piano for hours and we would sing. It's where I learned to harmonize. It's where he helped me find my vibrato. He was my first voice teacher, and I learned so much from him, from the things that he knew through music and also teaching and how to teach music. And it's really my first love now. I love teaching music more than anything, and that comes from my dad. All in all, my dad was really the most important man in my life growing up. I remember one time, one of the high school guys, I think I was hanging out at a choir practice or a football practice, I don't know. And they asked me, "Are you scared of your dad?" And I said, if I do something stupid or if I disobey, but it's not like a scary kind of fear, it's a healthy respect. I respected my dad, still do. And you have to remember, he had 2 sides to him, that crazy drill sergeant and also that silly, dry wit jokester. Beneath that really strict exterior that he had, he was just a big teddy bear. He was a brilliant artist. He was an amazing musician, singing in lots of different operas growing up, singing on the stage at Carnegie Hall. But the most important thing for my dad was his love of Jesus. And he was a force of nature. But, you know, in the end, I'm really proud to be the daughter of Gary Lunney. I guess that's it. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you so much, Lindy, for those very meaningful words. And I can tell you this, guys, if you have been in Mrs. Joe's choir class, or maybe her work with the the drama department and the play, if you have been in her class in any form or fashion, you just know that she is the daughter of a football coach, specifically a defensive coordinator. Mrs. Joe teaches music with an intensity and a passion that can only be from someone like Gary Lunney. So love the work she does at Rio. She really enhances the music program, and just is extremely talented in that field. And I think Rio Hondo is more than blessed to have her. So thank you, Mrs. Joe. And now let's hear from Robert Lunney, the youngest of the Lunney kids. Again, Robert was a few years older than me, just a few years older than me, and I happen to know a lot of his teammates, and as well as Robert back in the day. And so let's now hear from Robert Lunney on his 4th of July thoughts about his dad, Gary.
Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Lunney, and I am the son of Gary Lunney. My father was intense. Whether it was football or his army stories, everybody just enjoyed hearing what my father had to say. Even whenever I got together with old friends, the very first question my friends would ask is, "How is your father doing?" before his passing. And him being the homeroom teacher at my high school, that was, my dad made a lot of difference for a lot of people. For a football story, football was just my father's life. Some of my earliest memories are Sunday, coming home from church, kind of rambunctious to get something done, play around. But my dad, he would go in and he would watch his football, his NFL football, on his black and white, tiny little TV, and he would just be going, there. But he would always have football in the mind. Every time he met a child was born at youth church, he'd go, "Can you say linebacker? Can you say linebacker? I know you can." And football was just part of him. But for his military service, I knew that there were things he never talked about. There were always stories he did not want to mention, and so I just never wanted to get into that. However, I will tell you one of my favorite stories. My father was a sergeant, and I'm not sure if he touches on this in his book, but he said that one of his favorite people was a gentleman named Barnes. And Barnes was their demolition expert. And my dad always said every night whenever they were doing their patrols, they would always come upon things, and their demolition men would have to double check to make sure that they weren't booby trapped. But my dad said it was one of the funniest moments in his entire experience in Vietnam was Barnes said, "Hey Sarge, there's a chest up there, and I have to check it out to see if it's booby trapped." And they had protocols for the whole thing. Looked at it, and sure enough, it looked like the Viet Cong had left behind this cache to blow up. And so my dad told Barnes, "All right, but protocol, you know what to do." Barnes then strapped some C4 onto the said box, got just a little bit behind, But what Barnes didn't know was that there was other explosives in the chest, and when it blew everybody back very far. And unfortunately, when the dust cleared, Barnes came out, and my dad said he came up, looked my father straight in the eye, threw his helmet on the ground, and said, "Sarge, I quit." I just always found that to be one of my father's more humorous stories. There's not a day that goes by I don't miss my dad. And I just hope that everybody remembers to be kind to our military, because whether or not you support the Army or the military, just understand these men are giving up everything they have just to protect us and to give us a better life. And my father was one of the most selfless individuals I ever knew, and he gave it his all. Well, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot, Robert. I know a lot of us called Robert Bob, good old Bob Lunney back in the day. I think he goes by Robert usually. So, man, you're right, Robert. It's tough, when you lose someone. And I know it's been a few years since Mr. Lunney passed away, and each of us has lost people, not just, military service or whatever. It's just part of life. And you lose a lot of people, most people sooner rather than later. It gets easier, but yeah, to his point, the people closest to you that are no longer around, it's tough. It's tough to get by sometimes with their memories, but it's those memories and lessons we carry with us in everything we do. Robert, of course, extremely talented as well. You could see him, doing a lot of stage and theatrical type of things. I think he still works down for Disneyland. I remember we had a Star Wars themed homecoming a few years ago, and of course there was Bob with his lightsaber and coming out and being one of the characters there. So full of energy. Good old Robert Lunney. Good seeing you, man. Thanks for contributing to this project. I greatly appreciate it. All right, on to Ginger Deemers, formerly Ginger Lunney, back in the day as I should mention, Lindy, by the way, also a CIF basketball champion back in the day, I think 1990. Ginger, 1994 basketball champion. She also led Rio. She coached Rio basketball for quite some time, took them to the finals at least once, maybe twice. But I have fond memories of Ginger that I'll share with you after, but she was my science teacher. Again, I don't know how she got me, how I passed all these classes. She was one of the younger teachers as we were in high school, and she had extreme patience. She tried to make everything sports themed for me. So very, very grateful to her for helping me get through high school in chemistry and biology and all that fun stuff. So let's now hear from Ginger before we dive into duty calls here on the Charge to Keep podcast.
Happy 250th birthday, America. Happy 4th of July, everyone. Thanks, Matt, for having us on. So Matt wanted us in his episode to focus on my dad and football, my dad and his time in the Army. So for football, fun fact, on November 27th, 1976, my dad was busy coaching football and my mom went into labor. So my grandmother drove her to the hospital. My dad finished coaching the game and made it just in time for my birth. Isn't that just the Rio way? So as we grew up, my dad took us scouting for Mr. Randall Johnson for either football or basketball. My dad would choose one of us to hop in the car, grab some sandwiches. He had his clipboard and he made his notes, and he always gave us a job like, watch how many shots number so-and-so makes. So that was a really special time with my dad. And my dad was coaching football all the way to the end. My mom would put, if you didn't know, my dad got sick he had Parkinson's, dementia. And my mom would put any rerun of a football game on the TV, and my dad was still making X's and O's, planning his next defense. So I always thought they didn't make any sense near the end there, but I always just thought they were little hugs and kisses at the end. So football was in his heart all along. So on a personal note, something I loved about my dad was that he was an artist. He was my choir and art teacher. and he could just do anything. So for friends, he would paint oil paintings. He was trained in oil painting. He ran Sportline at Care for a bit. So that's hand embroidered by my dad. He made a little army jacket for Tim when he was little. And my dad wrote music. My dad was trained by a pretty important opera singer, I guess. I don't know. And he had a beautiful voice. But I'm going to read to you a poem my dad wrote for me. I had to dig through a box. I haven't read it in 30 years. And it was taped to my door. We never talked about it. 2 days after my 1994 team won the CIF basketball championship. So this is what my dad wrote. A night of nights, ginger, spice of life, running to and fro with teary eyes, joy unbounded. It had come to this. The night had grown long, emotions strained, tensions filled each face, and now only moments remained. Time was in. She took the ball, and down the court she came. And with the roaring crowd's approval, her shot came down like rain. 3 points, the upraised hands declared. The game began to end. And when the final buzzer blew, friend was hugging friend. Back and forth she flew, a butterfly in the sea of flowers, fluttering. I waited and watched it all, remembering. I could still recall her pausing at half court to pray, the sparkling eyes of little girls who came to watch her play, and all the bright blue balloons, a fragrant rose bouquet. Then, there she was, standing there before me, our glistening eyes met. Something passed between us. It was a night her dad will not forget. So that's really special. About the Army. Oh, first I'm gonna just tell you a quick story. My dad always had side jobs to make ends meet for our family. He always worked for like a graphics company doing artwork. But one of the companies he worked for was having a Christmas party, and he just wanted to get the bonus. He just came in after school, maybe twice a week, to do either set print for the printing company or do some artwork for them. But he really wanted his Christmas bonus. So it was at a restaurant, and they were doing karaoke, and alcohol was flying, and my dad did not drink. But they're like, Gary, come sing. And my dad, after a while, just said, he didn't know all the pop songs then, but he found the great Irish classic, Oh Danny Boy, and he went up there and sang. And he said every coworker was crying and patting him on the back, saying, Gary, we didn't know you could sing. They didn't know that my dad, who just came in for a little bit to do his job, was a loved choir teacher and football coach. So I love that story. Another time, my dad was working in the afternoon. We used to live for a short while on the greenhouse on the corner of Farna, where Eric Mosier lives. And I I was just coming home early from school, and the house was quiet. My dad was at his desk doing some artwork, and I went up to him, I went, boo! And my dad jumped so high, and he turned around and he squeezed my shoulder. He said, oh, Ginger, you cannot sneak up on Daddy. He was in a war, and surprising noises are very scary for him. And I remember later in choir, he was famous for talking about his Vietnam days. Kids really like to hear his stories. My next door neighbor, Chris, said he went into the Army partially because of hearing my dad's stories. But he told, scary stories about how being on patrol, if you fell asleep during patrol, you might be found dead in the morning. So I know later in life, my dad, when he got sick, we did not leave him in the hospital alone on the days on those nights that he had to be in the hospital, because some of that post-traumatic stress was coming out. He hid it well for most of his life, but he woke up scared sometimes in the hospital. And it just reminds me how our military, when they come home from their service, there's memories that are never going to go away, and we have to remember that about them, that they're carrying inside wounds, kind of. So thank you, everyone who has served for our country. It's made America the country that it is. It has its faults, but yeah, it's because of people like my dad that we get to celebrate our 250th year. So thanks, Matt, and go Rio.
Thank you, Ginger. Well said. Very well said. God bless the Lunney family as he continues to bless America and all throughout our history. With Ginger, I mean, she was teaching me in high school. I remember, I think she tells the story still. I never like paid attention that much. I'm such a bad student. But in science class, like we were doing these like chemical tests, something about ammonia. I don't even know what we were doing. We were just like studying the different mixes or whatever you call it. And so you're supposed to like barely like see what the scent is of this ammonia. And I just like, what? And then I took it and I took a huge, it's basically what smelling salts smells like, when they wake someone up who's been knocked out or whatever. I also had some real smelling salt another time during a basketball game. I got a massive concussion. That's another story for another day. But when I smelled that, I went, oh yeah, ammonia. That's like what Miss Demers, Ms. Lunney, Miss Ginger was talking to us about or something. So funny story with Ginger. Yeah. X's and O's. I remember she was talking about X's and O's and Lindy mentioned something similar. Bob also. I remember Mr. Lunney was talking one time about a defense. I remember 8-man football for most of his life. He says this one time he had all these different defenses, the 3-4, the 4-3, the 2-2 monster, the goal line. He was all over he's one time I created this defense. And when you make a good defense, you're looking for ways, you're thinking about ways to break the defense. You try to be an offensive coordinator in a sense. And he's like, no, we have this covered. We have this covered. He goes, I thought I had invented the greatest defense ever for 8-man football. And he's looking at it and studying it for the longest time. And then boom, it clicks that, there's 9 defensive players here. He added an extra player by accident, miscounted, and thought he had everything covered. He's like, oh, that's why I don't have, all right, this defense won't necessarily work. So that made me think of when they both mentioned the X's and O's there. So, all right. Thank you to Lindy, Robert, and Ginger. We're now going to dive into this book, guys, and, strap in. It's going to be a long one, but I think it'll all be worth it in the end. Tim Lunney will help me get through this here with his commentary before each chapter. So let's start this thing off. Once again, duty calls. Let's read the back of it just as a preview, to kind of get this thing going. Most draft-age young people growing up in the 60s and 70s had to make a personal decision, one way or another, about the war in Southeast Asia. They could answer the call to duty and join the country's fight against communism in Vietnam, or they could join those who were protesting that very war. This book is an accounting of one who was there, one who spent his days jumping in and out of doorless helicopters on airborne assaults, who learned to regard the people themselves with distrust, looking down some jungle trail with a faceless enemy with a booby trap or mine, who spent his nights on watch in 3-man ambush positions, his life literally in the hands of his 2 companions who were just as bone-weary as he was. This is the story of one squad leader and his squad, the men and women they met, and how it changed their lives forever. So that's what we're going to dive into, and yes, Gary Lunney did write this himself. Let's see. Published, all rights reserved, 2006. Publish America. All right. And with each chapter, I will read to you the name of the chapter. He has some notes at the beginning of each one that I will, it's usually terminology that I'll share with you then also. And we're just going to read the chapter by chapter. It's a couple pages long and move on to the next one. But first, let's go to Tim Lunney, who, again, you guys see at football games, taking great photography and photos, and he's a great teacher at Rio as well, working with Club Care and stuff throughout the summer. But really happy with his contribution to this, as all the Lunney children. But let's dive into it. Duty Calls with me, your host, Matt Hirschma, and, of course, accompanied by Tim Lunney here on the Charge to Keep podcast, 4th of July edition.
Happy 4th of July, everybody. God bless America. Happy 250th celebration. This is going to be a great celebration this year. And thank you for tuning in to the Matt Hirschma broadcast here of the reading of my dad's story in Vietnam. He was a soldier, a sergeant in the Army in Vietnam. He was drafted, and it was a time period when a lot of soldiers or a lot of people that were drafted, they didn't feel that duty to go to war. A lot of them bailed out, went to Canada. But my dad, he was true American, and he said, "I'm going to answer the call of duty." It was hard on him, hard on his family at the time. But he went to war, and this was right after the Tet Offensive. And historically, if you know anything about the war, this is right after Vietnam. The North had come down, the communists had come down. They attacked like over 100 different cities, and they were winning the battle. Then America battled back with the South Vietnamese to win back the land. And my dad was part of that crew that replaced a lot of the soldiers that were killed in the Tet Offensive. He actually was drafted. There was a draft going on back there. It's not like a lot it is now with people enlisting in the Army. We needed more soldiers at the time, and so they did a lottery, and my dad's number came up, and his number was selected. He was technically still in school, and fortunately they allowed him to finish his last year of college before going into the Army. And because of that, he actually missed the Tet Offensive and all that. So praise God, he actually survived, probably because he went to school. Stay in school, everybody. No, so seriously though, he actually got to be an officer after going through basic training. He didn't go as a private directly into the Army. He went as a sergeant because of his college degree. So again, going to school helped him. He majored in music, and he wrote songs in Vietnam. So anyway, I'm going to tell a little story about things he told me, different breakdown throughout the book. So I'm going to kind of do this in pieces, but the book kind of opens up with him jumping off a helicopter right in the middle of a battle. And I remember asking my dad about did you shoot people? Did you really get into it in the war? And his comment to me was, "I hope I never shot anyone. All I know is I jumped out of the airplane and I shoot the machine gun over my head, and I'm just trying to survive out there, man." So, he led his troops and he did what his missions were supposed to be. But his job, he didn't want to go out there and kill people. That's not what he was there for. His job, or what he wanted to do, was survive and to get back home. And politically, there's a lot of things going on at the time, where people were bailing out, running off to Canada. But my dad, he answered the call of duty. He went to war. And anyway, I'm going to get more into it on our next segment here. But I do want to mention, in that first chapter, he also mentions the goodbye, where he says farewell to a lot of friends. One of the friends he said goodbye to was a guy by the name of Dave Carson. A lot of you guys know him. Mr. Carson, Mark Carson's dad, head coach there at Rio Hondo Prep. So Mr. Dave Carson was my dad's best friend growing up ever since 9th grade. They were buddies. And so Dave had a problem with his eyesight. He wasn't allowed to go to war. So my dad, though, went. And Dave said, "I'm going to write you every day," and you'll read it in the story here, but he pretty much did write my dad as often as he could. And, to the end of my dad's life, they maintained they were always best friends. Dave came over a lot and spent a lot of time with my dad. My dad ended up getting Parkinson's because of his time over at Vietnam and walking through the forest and, the jungle. And he contracted the disease because of the Agent Orange that we were pouring all over the jungle to try to thin it out so we could see the enemy and all that. They were pouring chemicals all over the jungle. Our troops got it all over them. My dad ended up with the Parkinson's and diabetes and a whole bunch of stuff because of that. But anyway, I took care of him near the end of his life, and my whole family did. And so anyway, Dave Carson would come over all the time. They'd hang out. He'd take him on walks up to the park. They talk about the good old days. They'd read poetry together. So anyway, like I said, he's mentioned in the beginning of the book there. And shout out to the Carson family for always being looking out for my dad and all that. So anyway, I'm going to stop right here and we'll continue on with the next part. So my dad started basic training over at Fort Ord and later on went to Fort Polk for his infantry training. And then interesting fact, during the war in Vietnam, he actually earned a recognition for sinking a boat with he was into mortars. So he would launch mortars and blow things up with that. So he got really good at it. And I guess my mom said when he sank the boat, he actually wasn't meaning to sink the boat on that one. It was an accident. But anyway, he got an award for it. But anyway, back to the training. He went to Fort Benning in Georgia for NCO school. And then later over to Fort Lewis in Washington. And that's where he learned how to do drill sergeants. And anyone in football at Rio Hondo Prep, my dad from back in the day in the 70s, 80s, even 90s when he was coaching football. He was a drill sergeant to the T, man. Left, right, left, or even if you're in band, okay? So, his marching bands won all kind of awards because he perfected them. They were perfect in their marching and all that. So, he picked that up as a sergeant in the Army. But that's just a little fun fact for us Rio Hondo Prep students back in the day for band. And then, that drill sergeant mentality for football. Man, he was all over it, for defensive. He was the defensive coordinator at Rio Hondo Prep for years. And he drilled it into the kids. So that's part of the tradition here at Rio Hondo Prep. So I'm going to move on to the next part.
Chapter 1. Goodbye. Suddenly, automatic weapons fire and exploding rockets erupted from the tree line less than 100 meters away. Instinctively, we all bailed out of the speeding army truck onto the hard surface of the road and rolled down into the ditch opposite the tree line. Incoming rounds peppered the roadway in front of us and shredded the foliage just behind us. We tried to return fire as best we could, but we were pretty well pinned down. It was all we could do to hold our M16s above the roadway and spray in the general direction of the incoming fire. Rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, tore gaping holes in the bamboo to our rear. Then, abruptly, there was total silence. Afraid of returning artillery fire, the VC broke off the short firefight and melted away into the jungle. I checked out my squad. Everyone was okay this time. No one had been hit. A point-blank ambush with machine guns and RPGs, and yet the VC hadn't scratched us. Didn't hit a soul. The truck had taken some rounds, but other than that, everything was all right. I lay back down, trembling, my heart still pounding. What was I doing here? I must be out of my mind. Just a short 16-hour flight away from this place, I had a real life, stateside in California. I had a college degree, a lot of friends, and a future. Yet here I was halfway around the world, riding around with complete strangers, being shot at by people who didn't even know me, risking my life daily for villagers who only wished I'd go away and leave them alone. What a strange situation. How in the world did I get involved? How did I get here? As I lay there, my mind raced over all the events that had led me to this muddy ditch in Southeast Asia, to a little country called Vietnam. My draft board had been kind enough to issue me a college deferment so I could finish my senior year in college. Then after my graduation, they informed me that my lottery number just came up and my services were needed by the military. I was bused to Fort Ord, California for my basic training. I was then flown to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry training, and then on to Fort Benning, Georgia for NCO school. After a stint of duty as a drill instructor at Fort Lewis, Washington, I was sent over to Vietnam to apply what I had learned. I arrived just in time to be a replacement for the Tet Offensive. I had already said goodbye to my mom and dad and to my two sisters. They were all proud of me, but at the same time apprehensive, not knowing what the future might hold. My 23 days of precious leave time had just flown by, and in the morning I was due to report to the Oakland Army base for my flight to Vietnam. It was a warm Sunday night, and I was the guest of honor at a going-away party at the bachelor house we were renting in Monrovia. My friends had all come over for one final get-together to wish me well. We shared the bravado of the moment, not really knowing whether we would ever see each other again. My best friend since 9th grade, Dave, was there with a bit of a tear in his eye. I had served as best man at his wedding when he had married Marion a couple years before, and we had spent countless hours through the years playing ball, walking home together, and talking about things. He had been refused induction into the military because of a childhood injury to one of his eyes. And I'm sure he felt a little guilty knowing I was going off to war while he stayed safe at home. "I'll write you every day," he promised with a hug, and he nearly did. It was letters from good old Dave that brightened up many a dreary day over there. Finally, we all said our goodbyes, and one by one, my friends, with whom I shared my life for so many years, all drifted out into the night, getting ready for another week. But for me, it wasn't just another week. It was the beginning of something that would change my life forever. Beth was the last to leave. We had been seeing a lot of each other lately, and it was painfully difficult to say goodbye. I looked into those warm brown eyes, wondering if I would ever see her again. We spent a lot of time standing out there in the dark on the front lawn talking about the good times we'd had together and what the future still might hold for us. Would she be willing to wait for me to return? Questions and fears raced through my mind. A year is a long time to wait, and I wondered just how I would come home. Unharmed, crippled for life, or in a body bag. It was unfair for me to ask her to wait, so we said our final goodbyes, not knowing. The next morning, I would be flying to Oakland, California, to the Army base. Within hours, I'd be in a jet, headed halfway around the world to fight in a war for people I'd never met, in a land I'd never seen. Finally, everyone was gone, and I stood there alone, staring into the night sky, wondering. Strange feelings flooded my thoughts. I felt patriotic, even good about going. Scared, sure, but I still felt we were somehow doing something rather noble, defending the rights of these helpless peasants against the onslaughts of communism. Daily we read the newspaper, and I heard on TV about the way the U.S. was standing with the Republic of Vietnam against the communist North Vietnamese, who were backed by the Chinese. We had been warned time and time again about the so-called domino theory, the belief that if Vietnam fell to communism, Laos would soon follow, then Cambodia, Thailand, etc. So if we didn't go in and help the South Vietnamese, this entire part of the world would turn communist. Nationwide, there was violent opposition to the war. Tens of thousands of college-age guys had burned their draft cards in protests against the war. On college campuses across the land, rallies protested the United States' role in the war. Thousands of draft-age guys fled across the border to Canada to avoid being drafted. I saw it firsthand as I finished out my college deferment and earned the BA. It seemed strange at the time. Shouldn't we be supporting our government? How could these long-haired hippies know as much about the condition of Southeast Asia as our own government? Strangely, I didn't share their views. My personal convictions leaned to the conservative side, I guess. I knew and admired our congressman. My friends and I had several conversations with him here in California and on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C., where we had met him one summer. Nationwide was a genuine fear of communism spreading throughout the entire world. It had to be stopped before it came to our own doorstep, before the United States became outnumbered by the communist-backed regimes. The war presented an interesting dilemma. On the other hand, there was a multitude of these young protesters who were violently opposed to the war. A lot of them could be drafted, and they simply didn't choose to risk their lives. On the other hand, many others believed the war was just, and that these young people should answer the call of duty, just as countless soldiers had done since the Revolutionary War. For some of the younger ones who could be labeled as, quote, conservative, it was a matter of put up or shut up. If we believed our country was doing the right thing, we should step up and do the right thing ourselves. In this case, put our lives on the line for what we believed. It was our turn to answer the great American call. Duty calls. So, instead of catching a flight to Canada, early the next morning, I got on a plane headed for the Oakland Army Base and eventually to this ditch in Southeast Asia.
So in the second chapter here of the Oakland Army Base, it talks about him being shipped off to Vietnam. And one of the interesting stories is they're flying through Alaska. And it's interesting just because it was the first time he'd ever been to Alaska. He didn't even set foot in Alaska, but one of the things that he wanted to do was go back to Alaska, and our family was able to do that. It was like the last big vacation we were able to do with him. So we got on a cruise up there and took him to Alaska. And I'll send the link to Matt if anyone was interested in seeing my dad up in Alaska. He just had a great time out on the boat, seeing all the, the beautiful scenery up there, the animals. And so just a quick little side note about his first time in Alaska was not the best trip because he was on his way to Vietnam. But, he got to actually enjoy Alaska at some point.
Chapter 2, Oakland Army Base. Mess hall, an Army dining area. Camouflage fatigues, multicolored combat uniforms designed to blend in with the jungle. After enjoying my final civilian flight and bus ride the next morning, I reported for duty at Oakland Army Base. Everything about the place seemed upbeat. Sure, it was the military, but somehow upbeat. All the Oakland-based personnel I knew what we were about to face, so they really made an effort to make things go smoothly. We still waited in lines. It wouldn't be the Army without lines, but they moved quickly enough. We marched over to supply, where we were all issued spiffy new outfits for the spring. Green was definitely in this year. Even our shorts and t-shirts were green. The camouflage fatigues were specially made for the Vietnamese climate, a kind of loose weave cotton. I especially liked the boots. They were ultra light, constructed of rubber and canvas so they could dry out quickly. Now, if there's one more thing the military has control over in its efforts to boost troops' morale, it's the mess hall. I have been in some good ones and in a few really bad ones. Well, the Oakland mess hall was unusually good. It seemed the cooks went out of their way to serve us excellent food, and they tried to be kind of cheesy about it too. And then there it was. Right over the serving line hung a rather large sign promising a special steak dinner upon our return from Vietnam. Anytime, day or night, it read. It seemed like an appointment I'd like to keep. I remember planning to take them up on that. After lunch, they escorted us to our staging area and assigned us our boarding numbers. Our section of the huge plane hangar was covered with hundreds and hundreds of metal bunk beds. We tossed our duffel bags on the bunks in our area and waited. In the Army, you get pretty good at waiting. Finally, word came down. The loudspeakers crackled with our boarding numbers and a crisp, "Time to move out." So, shouldering our worldly belongings, we marched out into the night to the waiting tour buses for our trip to the airstrip. Like clockwork, the buses rolled up to the planes and we loaded the jets. Destination, Vietnam. As we taxied out into the darkness, getting ready for takeoff, the pilot explained we would be flying the polar route to Vietnam. to Vietnam, and that we would be making a short refueling stop in Alaska. A short 16-hour flight that would completely change our lives forever. When we finally touched down in Alaska, I was awake and wanted to put my foot down on American soil one more time. But the crew explained there wasn't time to exit the aircraft, that we'd be on our way just as soon as we refueled. They were right. Soon we were on our way again. This time, nonstop to Vietnam.
The next chapter, called In Country. My dad is now landed in Vietnam. He's about to see action, but first, he's got to gear up. So he got his M16. The dude could not find a helmet to fit him. He's got a big old melon. He was a size 8. I think he wrote 7.5 here in the book, but yeah, he had a big old head. Nothing ever fit him, but that wasn't going to stop him. He figured it out, how to strap it on and everything. And so anyway, it talks about how he went out and, they did a little more training on identifying ambushes and, going through the mud patties and that kind of stuff and just looking for booby traps. So he talks a little bit about that in this chapter.
Chapter 3, In Country. Base Camp is a large U.S. military encampment. Viet Cong, name given to guerrilla forces hostile to the U.S. VC, short for Viet Cong. M16, automatic assault rifles used by the U.S. troops. A shimmering mix of lush green foliage and deep blue water stretched across the horizon as we made our final approach to Long Binh Airport. It looked like half the country was underwater. A blast of hot air smacked us in the face as we deplaned. Already at mid-morning, the temperature was passing 102 degrees. We worked up a sweat just walking down the portable stairs to the tarmac. After retrieving our duffel bag, we loaded onto large open trucks for our bumpy ride to base camp. They offloaded us at Dong Tam, our new base camp, our new home away from home, the home of the Army's 9th Division. As promised, our lives had been completely changed in less than 24 hours. The war was a lot closer than we ever knew. We had been assigned to the southern part of South Vietnam, the Delta region that included Long Binh, Mai Tho, Saigon, and thousands of little thatched huts sitting along mud dikes. We were the replacement for the soldiers that had just been lost in the recent Tet offensive. We had missed it by only 2 days. There was action aplenty, and we were about to see it firsthand. We lugged our duffel bags through the orientation lines and finally ended up at our new training command. We would be spending 2 weeks acclimating ourselves to the heat, the mosquitoes, and the certain knowledge that when we left the relatively safety of Dong Tam, little people in black pajamas would be trying to kill us. The reality of the situation had really sunk in. We were no longer training. We were in the war. At the training command, Supply issued each of us our own M16 rifle with clips and live ammo to put in them. Just put 19 bullets in your clips, we were instructed. Yes, the clip was designed for 20 shells, but if we were to force 20 shells in, it would most certainly jam in a firefight. So 19 it was. With one finger always near the safety and our thumbs resting on the automatic switch, anytime we wanted our rifles could become fully automatic. We would squeeze off the single shots or fire in short bursts. Supply also issued us ponchos, 2 canteens, packs, extra fatigues, jungle hats, and an extra pair of those good old jungle boots. Everything we might need for 1 year away. Everything fit well enough except for my jungle hat. I've always had a large head. The closest size I could find, my whole tour there was 6 5/8. However, I found that by wearing the strap on the back of my head instead of under my chin, I could keep it on my size 7.5 head. During our 2 weeks of in-country training, they put us through our paces, reviewing everything from proper procedures for exiting a hovering helicopter to correct spacing on our patrols, and lots of warnings about booby traps and mines. Booby traps and anti-personnel mines inflicted heavy casualties on the U.S. troops. Many a soldier lost an arm, a leg, or his life simply because he stepped on the wrong spot. That made travel in the Delta region difficult. In the Delta, everyone grows rice. Growing rice covers every inch of the country that's not jungle. Rice paddies are everywhere, thousands and thousands of rice paddies. And instead of fences making good neighbors, in South Vietnam, neighbors share a common dike line between their paddies, a 3 to 5 foot wide path that rises out of the mud, which has defined their family's property lines for centuries. That makes walking along the dike lines the easiest way to travel, and also the most dangerous. The VC would anticipate the travel of U.S. troops and would mine the dikes. So obviously, the best way to avoid the booby traps and mines was to stay off the dikes and walk in the rice paddies, in the mud. That's right, mud. Thick, gooey, ankle-deep, boot-sucking mud. It wasn't much fun mushing along, but when the alternative was stepping on a booby trap or anti-personnel mine, we grumbled and stayed in the mud. For our last training command experience, we participated in live fire platoon-sized night ambush patrol. We didn't know it at the time, but this was the safest patrol we would be on for the next year. We were scared. Probably not as badly as the officers of the training command who accompanied us, bumping around in the dark with 40 green recruits, each with several full clips and a vivid imagination. Fortunately, the night passed uneventfully, and dawn found us marching triumphantly back to Dong Tam, another step closer for the real war. The following day, we graduated from our training command to the tune of a live military band and then loaded with our packs, duffel bags, pots, rifles, and all onto the trucks, ready to join our assigned units and take our place in the war.
So Firebase Moore opens up with my dad meeting up with an old buddy from basic training camp. He names him Richard Robertson. I don't really know if that's his real name or if he made that up for the book. But regardless, they had met over there in Fort Ord, and Robertson was a mortar expert, which is actually how my dad got into the mortars later on. So he actually helped train him. So my dad was proficient at that as well. But they also talk about in here my dad getting into his assignment, going to his platoon, and he told me an interesting story earlier on that when he first got there, they were all asleep. Okay, he talks about that in the story here, but what he doesn't mention is when he first walked in, there was like pictures of all kinds of stuff on the walls, and he's like, nope, not having that here. So while the rest of the troops were sleeping the first night, he walked in, he's taking down all their pictures off the walls, anything that was not appropriate. And he's like, we're not having that in this platoon. I'm here at war, and we're not going to have that filth here. And that was just the type of guy my dad was. So he ran a strict ship there. He ran a strict ship at our house, and he was a man of God, and he wasn't going to have any of that kind of filth in his platoon. And the men respected him for that eventually. But yeah, he was very strict on that, and he wasn't going to have that. So just an interesting side note.
Chapter 4, Firebase Moore. Firebase, a small company-sized encampment. NCO School, specialized training for mass-producing squad sergeants for Vietnam. AK-47, a Chinese-made automatic assault rifle used by the VC. My truck bumped and lurched along Highway 4, making slow headway south towards my assigned outpost. The countryside was gorgeous, everything as green as a garden. it was easy to forget there was a war on. Everywhere we looked, we saw Vietnamese. Well, after all, it was Vietnam. But the first thing that took a little getting used to was that everyone dressed the same black pajamas, the same woven hats, the same homemade sandals cut from discarded U.S. Army tires. The only difference was one you couldn't see. Vietnam had suffered under colonial domination for more than a century. First under the French, next under the Japanese during World War II. And then after they had helped us defeat the Japanese, we allowed the French to return. So most of the locals considered us just another version of the French colonialism. We didn't look like them, we didn't dress like them, we didn't act like them. They were accustomed to foreign troops. They didn't like it much, but they were used to it. So while a few of the Vietnamese accepted our help and our money, most of them wish we would just go home and mind our own business. Some of them were fed up with occupational forces and hated our presence enough to want us dead. The only way we could tell was when they whipped out their AK-47s and began shooting at us. Distrust became part of our daily routine. Otherwise, it was a lovely day, and soon we arrived at our destination. Firebase Moore was just one of the several hundred small company-sized bases that spread through most of South Vietnam, designed to give our ground troops fire support whenever they needed it. From these bases, the Army provided artillery support for their infantry missions in the surrounding countryside. There was usually a full battery of 105 howitzers and a squad of 81mm mortars to provide covering fire for any of our patrols that became engaged in a firefight with the Viet Cong. The truck dropped several of us off at the gate and lumbered on its way south. I shouldered my gear and started looking for the command bunker. As I turned the corner, small world, I bumped right into Robertson. Richard Robertson. Small world. Robertson and I met at basic training back in California at Fort Ord. Well, actually, we could have met at high school. We discovered that we had both graduated from Arroyo High School in El Monte, California, where his father was district superintendent. We had both been enrolled at Arroyo in 1959, but our paths hadn't crossed until 1967 at Fort Ord. After basic, both of us had been assigned infantry training at Fort Polk, Louisiana. But we only saw each other once there. He had gone directly to Vietnam, and I had been assigned further NCO training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and mortar training as a drill instructor at Fort Lewis, Washington. Now here we were, face to face, halfway around the world. We had even been assigned to the same company. I was there to command a squad in one of the infantry platoons while he ran the company mortar platoon. He directed me to the command bunker and invited me to come by his mortar bunker when I got settled in. Once again, I hefted my gear and made my way to the command bunker. After the first sergeant looked through my paperwork, he pointed out my platoon's area and the platoon's sergeant bunker. The platoon sergeant looked sleepy as he eyed me, thinking, I'm sure, here, one more green recruit for me to take care of. He indicated which bunker I would be in charge of and disappeared, back behind the sandbag entrance to his bunker. My new home away from home sat on the very edge of the perimeter, just behind the claymores and the barbed wire. Beyond the rows of barbed wire, the paddy lay baking in the afternoon sun. Nothing moved. I stuck my head carefully inside the bunker. Nothing moved in there either, except for the flies. Everyone was asleep. Evidently, the only people awake along this whole section of the perimeter were myself and the platoon sergeant I had disturbed. Quietly, I looked around the bunker, found an empty cot, and assumed it would be my spot and started getting my stuff in order. Finally, I too laid down to rest. About an hour passed, and one by one the men began to wake up. I introduced myself, told them I was their new squad sergeant, and tried quickly to memorize everyone's name. As they checked me out, I knew exactly what they were thinking. We have a brand new green sergeant from the States to tell us what to do. We've already been here for months and know the ropes. This guy will probably get us all killed. I tried to assure their fears, telling them how new I felt, how I really needed their help and valued their advice. Some of them, I think, sensed my sincerity and decided to give me a try. The others gave me a look of disgust that told me they would be looking out for themselves. I could hardly blame them. I'm sure I might have felt the same way. It was a tough situation, and we'd all have to make the best of it.
So my dad's platoon was ordered to go on daily patrols. And this is not fun patrol time. This is walking through mud and rice paddies and at nighttime a lot of times. And they were put in groups of 3. And I remember a lot of times in choir, band class, my dad would stop and tell stories of Vietnam. And this was one of the ones you talk about, just the fact that they'd go out and they would go in different groups. They set them in groups of 3 along the route. Protect the roads for future, U.S. troops to move from city to city, but they had to protect the roads at nighttime because the Viet Cong would come and try to blow things up. So you're basically in the hands of the other 2 guys. If they fall asleep, and you could get your throat sliced in the middle of the night, it's just part of life. And so my dad never really slept. He told me I never slept any of those nights, and he just tried to stay up the entire time and sleep back at the barracks. But, after doing that for weeks and weeks, you have to start trusting the guys around you. And so that was part of the war. He never liked it. But that's what the patrol is all about. He talks a lot about that here. He also talks about Sarge. Sarge was one of the stories my dad would tell in choir about this, basically a Rambo. And he had a Rambo type of guy in his platoon. And he was thankful because this is the type of guy you wanted to go to war with, because he was gung-ho. I can't remember if he was on his 3rd or 4th tour of duty over there, but yeah, he was over there, and this was his life. He was a warrior. So being with Sarge actually made my dad feel a lot more comfortable. Not that he liked being at war, and he didn't like going over there, but being with Sarge was always a good thing.
Chapter 5, Patrol. Flare, an illumination round fired from a mortar. M60 ammo. Every squad member arrived carried extra belts of M60 machine gun ammo. A runner came over and announced that I was needed ASAP in the platoon sergeant's bunker. I hustled on over and found the other 2 squad sergeants already there. The platoon sergeant introduced the other 2 squad leaders and then messed up my name. I'm sure he introduced himself too, but to this day, I cannot recall his name. I just remembered him as Sarge. He was about 6'1" and about 220 pounds, broad-shouldered, wore his hair in a very short military buzz, and looked every bit a warrior. If you had to go into battle, this was the man you would want to lead you. It was his 3rd tour of duty in Vietnam. He had shipped back to the States after his 2nd tour, intensely disliked stateside duty, and volunteered to return to Vietnam. On the onset of the recent Tet Offensive, he had reported for duty in our company, found that our guys were already deployed in Saigon. So he grabbed the 1st sergeant's Jeep, drove into Saigon at the height of the offensive, found our guys, and walked point for them. The guys who survived Tet all claimed they owed their lives to Sarge. He got right down to business. We would be going out on a night ambush patrol. It was old news to the other 2 squad leaders. I listened intently to the route and directions, etc. We would leave at dusk, go out into the surrounding countryside, and come out at various vantage points that overlooked Highway 4. We would be in 3-man positions, and when the VC came to blow up the road, we would take them out. A strict curfew had been imposed throughout all of South Vietnam to restrict the free movement of the VC at night. No one was to move about after sunset. So as our patrol began, the only thing moving out here in our sector would be the VC. I tinged with apprehension as I hustled down to the mess tent. I hurried through dinner and hustled back to my bunker. The men were expecting the patrol. They were used to the routine. There was still some time left, so I decided to go see Robertson. His bunker was right in the middle of the fire base, just where he said it was. He invited me in, and we talked for a while. We reminisced about the good old days at Fort Ord, about the time the two of us shut down the rest of the platoon in a political debate one night at Basic, and about the time Pappas got drunk and came into the barracks brandishing a loaded .45 to shoot us all, and we had to disarm him and put him in the shower to sober him up. I then proceeded to make a total fool of myself, handing him my wallet and half-finished letter to my folks. I asked him if he would be sure that these things got sent to my folks in case I never returned from the patrol. Okay, it was a little melodramatic, but I was more than a little apprehensive. He smiled and assured me that he would take care of it, so I thanked him and hurried out to make preparations for the patrol. I checked out my clips and taped 2 of them together for a quick clip exchange in case we got in a firefight. The squad fell out just before the dusk of inspection. I wasn't sure what we were supposed to be carrying, but the squad assured me they were carrying enough M60 ammo and grenades. We took our place in the middle of the platoon formation and headed for the jungle. Sarge used hand signals as we dropped off people in 3-man positions overlooking the highway. It wasn't long before it was my turn. The 3 of us headed out through the jungle toward the highway. We found a low spot behind a little rise of ground that overshadowed the highway and was thick with undergrowth. It was fairly secluded, so we decided to set up there. The ideal 3-man ambush position keeps someone on watch all night, but allows everyone to get a little sleep. We rotated every hour, so that meant that we would watch for 1 hour and sleep for 2, our lives literally in the hands of the person on watch. We had heard stories about men on watch falling asleep and in the morning finding everyone in the position with their throats cut. I learned to be a very light sleeper. I volunteered for second watch, the worst one, but that was okay. I was a lot more tested than these guys, and they appreciated my doing it. Now I started to realize why everyone was sacked out in mid-afternoon. A steady routine of sleeping for 2 hours, watching for 1 all night, every night, made everyone bone weary most of the time. It seemed as if I had just fallen asleep when the radio operator woke me up for my watch. I wasn't as tired as he was, but I was tired enough. I looked down the road, trying to focus my eyes, trying to wake up. As I lay there, looking over my gun barrel at the open area between the opposite tree line and Highway 4, I spotted what seemed like movement. I started to sweat. It looked like some bushes were moving toward Highway 4. I immediately called the mortars. After a moment, Robertson came on, and in a hushed tones over the radio, I whispered, Robertson, I have movement at my sector. I need illumination. Coming up, he replied. Minutes later, a red parachute flare popped high over the highway. We could see more clearly now, and the bushes had stopped moving. I waited, still nothing. Gradually, the flare descended, dimmed, and finally went out. About 20 minutes slowly passed. There! The bushes were moving again. I was sure of it, creeping ever closer to the highway. I woke up Robertson and told him to pop another flare. Once again, the night sky blazed with red as the flare drifted slowly to the highway. Again, nothing moved. I was getting a little frustrated. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? I had heard stories of that happening, but I saw the bushes move. About a half an hour later, as I woke up, Robertson once again, another voice joined me on the radio frequency. The voice belonged to Sarge. After some choice, whispered comments about my previous 2 calls and something about the 4th of July, bottle rockets and fireworks, he instructed me to not call again that night, to wake up the next shift if he wasn't already awake, and go to sleep. Fortunately, only a few people figured out the source of the illumination, and Sarge was understanding in the morning. I had only one more problem facing Robertson. I sure felt sheepish entering his bunker. He was awake and in a good mood. I apologized for waking him and crying wolf. We laughed, and he graciously returned my wallet and half-finished letter. We agreed I probably wouldn't need to burden him with my valuables again, and that anyone with eyes sharp enough to see the breeze move bushes in the middle of a moonless night would probably make it through many a night patrol. It had begun.
My dad's first experience in a helicopter was there in Vietnam. He hops in the Huey, and there ain't no doors on those things and no seatbelts. All you got to do is just hang on to the bars and really trust the centripetal force. So that's what he did. He talks about landing in jumping out of the helicopters, 3 to 5 feet, landing in piles of mud and just covered in mud. In the story here, he'll talk about his the machine gun. He jumps in and it gets completely clogged with mud. Can't even fire. Got like bullets flying everywhere. He's sitting there in a ditch just using his canteen to try to take the mud out of his gun because, he can't fire a muddy gun. It'll just blow up. So he basically wasted all his water just trying to clean the gun. By the time he got the gun ready to fire, the battle was over and they're marching on to the next place.
Chapter 6, Assault. RVN, Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, Military Forces. Choppers, Army slang for helicopters. LZ, a landing zone. If you are receiving fire as you go in, it's a hot LZ. Nuc, Vietnamese word meaning water. Hooch, bamboo, Vietnamese hut. Papasan, adult male Vietnamese. Huey, slang for the UH-1D helicopter that carried us all over South Vietnam. Most mornings at dawn, we returned to Firebase Moore by walking along Highway 4. We had almost no risk of hitting a VC ambush. Not in broad daylight, not out in the open, not so close to base camp. We would always pass by the RVN outpost, an old mud-walled fort just for the south side of the highway. The Republic of the Vietnam Army was paper tight, ragtag at best. At this point in the war, it was a total joke as a fighting force. The Vietnamization of the war was just beginning and hadn't reached our area yet. The locals couldn't go up against the North Vietnamese Army. Actually, they never needed to since the U.S. forces did all the fighting. They were a friendly sort, though, waving to us most mornings and shouting, "GI number 1." We would usually wave back. After all, we were on the same side in this war. But after a while, it started to wear on me a little. It was their country, yet we were the ones who were risking our lives. While we lay out in the rain and mud all night in 3-man ambush positions, swatting mosquitoes and looking for the bad guys, what did our comrades do? They slept well in their walled fort. It seemed a tad one-sided to me. Should have been the other way around. Slowly, my opinions about the war were shifting. Most mornings as we came up the road to Firebase Moore, we could smell the coffee brewing. The cooks were already up, busily getting breakfast ready for us. Some guys would go ahead and eat right then. Others would rather clean up a bit, maybe put on a clean set of fatigues and then do breakfast. We usually had about an hour after breakfast to clean our weapons, check our clips and ammo. Most everyone tried to get a little rest in addition. I would generally end up in the sergeant's bunker for a briefing about the day's routine. In any event, the choppers would come for us about 10 o'clock a.m. We would assemble in the paddy outside the wire in groups of 6 or 8, spaced far enough apart so the entire chopper formation could touch down at the same time. Scoop us up and leave for the day's mission. The first time I went up, I was a little nervous. Okay, I had knots in my stomach. As the choppers touched down, they kind of hovered just over the paddy, sending dirt, sand, leaves, muddy water, and parts of plants swirling everywhere. My eyes were set about click past squint as I dove into the chopper. And being inexperienced, I was too slow to get one of the built-in canvas seats, so I ended up one of the guys sitting on the floor. It was just as if we were lifting off that I noticed. There were no doors. No doors. None of the Hueys had doors. They had all been removed so that the troops could get in and out rapidly in the face of enemy ground fire. As the chopper lifted off and gained altitude, I found myself sitting on the floor only 2 feet from the edge, where the door should have been. Now I didn't want to let all the men in my squad know how terrified I really was. After all, I was their leader. So I reached back with my free hand and found a metal support to one of the canvas seats and clenched it tightly. I tried to assume an air of nonchalance while my free hand was desperately clinging the metal support just behind me. Finally, we reached our target area and started our descent in formation. The chopper made a banking turn gradually, but then rather steeply. I held on even tighter, nearly bending the seat strut I was clutching. I kept saying to myself, almost audibly, I believe in centripetal force. I believe in centripetal force. From my vantage point on the floor, I could make out 2 gunships just ahead of us, softening up the landing zone. One was firing rockets and the other was spraying the tree line with machine gun fire. The chopper descended into the black smoke and sound of exploding rockets. Oh, great, I thought, a hot LZ. They had warned us about this back in the States. In the textbook example, the gunship would soften up the LZ, preparing it for the troops. Then the troops would go in and find out that the gunships had bagged and secured the area so the choppers could land safely. This was nothing like that. We were taking fire as we went in. The chopper pilot stopped his descent at about 6 feet or so above the patty, and as he skimmed along, he motioned for us to jump. He was not going to set it down. So as the door gunners smoked the nearby tree line, we stepped out on the chopper skid and jumped from the rapidly moving Huey, being sure to jump away from the rear rotor, which would shred you like salad if you jumped badly. I sloshed into the muddy water barrel first and scrambled to the closest paddy dike. Automatic weapons fired chipped away at the top of the dike above us. AK-47 rounds whizzed overhead, and the unmistakable pungent smell of small arms fire floated across the paddy. Mud oozed from the barrel of my M16. I couldn't return fire. It would have blown up. Hunkering down behind the safety of the dike, I took out my canteen and began washing the mud off my barrel and then carefully cleaned the inside. By the time I had finished cleaning my weapon, the firing had stopped. The VC were probably anticipating an artillery strike and broke off contact. Cautiously, we spread out and made our way to the tree line, where we spotted a few bamboo hooches. Someone obviously had been living there, but they didn't appear to be VC sympathizers. Probably the village took off when the choppers came, knowing there would be a gunfight. We searched everywhere and found nothing. No Viet Cong, no supplies, no tunnels, no villagers. They had all disappeared into the jungle. We spread out, secured the area, and rested. It had been a pretty eventful hour or so. Gradually, the sound of the jungle returned, and we seemed more a part of a picture postcard than part of a war. Sweat poured from my helmet. My fatigues were soaked. My boots were thick with mud. My body cried out for water, so I finished off my second canteen and felt a lot better. Okay, let's mount up. It was Sarge's voice. Mount up? We were tired. We had just completed an airborne assault, swept the area, and made it secure. Wasn't that enough? Let's mount up? It was Sarge's voice. Don't bunch up. Keep your distance. The sun had used almost a whole canteen of precious water. Wasn't that enough? Let's move out. Don't bunch up. Keep your distance. The sun blazed down, baking our heads in our helmets. There was no cloud cover at all. After half an hour or so, my thirst returned, and I was out of water. I had used almost a whole canteen of precious water cleaning my stupid rifle when it went barrel down in the original assault. Everyone else was guzzling the water from their second canteen, and mine was bone dry. I was burning up. No one had issued us salt pills. Though we had been advised of the importance of not getting dehydrated, I suppose there's nothing like firsthand experience. I begin to feel lightheaded. The early afternoon sun pushed the temperature up somewhere around 110 degrees. The thermometer had long passed sweltering and was on its way up to cook. Just then we were approaching what seemed to be a friendly village. I was almost ready to try some paddy water, but remembered the warnings we had received about drinking the water and the information that paddy was a place where the locals and their water buffalo improved the nitrate content of their property by relieving themselves. In addition, there was some diseases that were life-threatening, so for the moment, I passed on the paddy water and stumbled into the village. I must have looked pretty desperate. Pointing to my empty canteens, I made some gestures to the closest Papasan. He smiled a wide, toothless grin and pointed to a huge 4-foot earthen pot sitting under the corner of his thatched hut, and asked in Vietnamese, "Nook? Nook? Yes, Nook. Good old Nook." He removed the cover, revealing a giant pot of fresh rainwater. The pot was strategically situated so that it collected the fresh monsoon water that ran off his thatched roof. I satisfied my raging thirst and filled my 2 canteens. I can't remember any water, before or after that, ever tasting so good. I tried to thank the old gentleman and ended up in a nodding match. I'm pretty sure I out-nodded him.
The sweep chapter talks about a pretty serious battle my dad was in, where the guy right in front of him gets shot, the platoon RTO right behind him gets shot. So, he's getting bullets flying everywhere. By the grace of God, he wasn't hit. But once again, Sarge steps in and calls them for a medevac and says, "We need it now. Get over here. I don't care if we're under enemy fire." And so they get there, they load up, they're able to get the guys out that survived. But it was definitely a really scary situation. And just so you guys know, there's stories that my dad did not write about that are not in this book. He didn't really want to talk about them, but he saw a lot there. And Vietnam, you talk about coming back with post-traumatic stress. He definitely ended up having that. He covered it for years, but just the intensity of the battle and all that, by the time he was with Parkinson's and not able to control his mind, he would have dreams. He would say, ninjas on the walls trying to attack him. So definitely a real thing, and our troops all come home with it. So, once again, it's something that the rest of us need to understand, that these poor soldiers, they do go through a lot, and they need that mental support when they get back, the family support, the structure there, to get them through it.
Chapter 7, Sweep. Gung-ho, Army slang for someone who is a little over-enthusiastic. Medevac, helicopters with medical personnel aboard used to extract the wounded from combat zones. Cobra gunship, formidable U.S. assault chopper equipped with miniguns, rockets, and grenade launcher. RTO, the radio telephone operator. We lay out in the pouring rain all night again, guarding the stupid road. It was the middle of monsoon season, so it was difficult to see 15 to 20 feet in front of us, much less down the road. What a total joke. No VC in his right mind would be out in a storm like that, and if they were, we would never have seen them anyway. But now the cold, wet, eventless night was over. Back at base camp, the sun was coming out and breakfast was cooking. The discomforts of the long night forgotten, we ate a big breakfast, changed into nice, dry fatigues, and stretched out on our canvas cots to catch up some much-needed sleep. No sooner had I laid down than a message came from Sarge's bunker. Squad sergeant's meeting. Grudgingly, I slipped into my thongs and dragged myself over to his bunker. I was early. Sergeant Sykes hadn't arrived yet, and we needed Sergeant Sykes. He had graduated NCO school at Fort Benning, Georgia, just as I had. But unlike myself, Sergeant Sykes really liked the infantry. On our helicopter assaults, he could always be found standing on one of the chopper's landing struts, ready to jump into trouble. I, on the other hand, went out of my way not to be a target. Finally, Sergeant Sykes arrived, and Sarge filled us in on our next mission. Lucky us, we were assets. That's Army talk for the chopper's coming today. You don't get any rest. It's sweep time. We get to spend the whole day trudging around in the mud. My squad reacted predictably to the news, like it was my fault. Oh, do I wish I had control over the chopper distribution. Grumbling, we dressed, gathered our ammo and supplies, and made our way down to the chopper pad just outside the fences. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and already the sun was blistering. Where was the monsoon when you needed it? A distant hum gradually grew louder, and soon we could make out the choppers on the horizon. They approached in formation, and they set down. The huge rotor blades stirred up the mud and water from the paddy, swirling and coating each of us with a fresh layer of goo. Well, so much for the clean fatigues. The roar of the chopper motor was incredible. Vocal communication over the roar was quite impossible. We could scream at the top of our lungs, and people sitting right next to us could not hear at all. I often took to singing on those flights, since no one could hear me anyway. The helicopters seemed to follow the roads a lot to help in their navigation. Lots of times we found ourselves thousands of feet off the ground, flying over Highway 4. Somehow the lyrics from My Fair Lady seemed appropriate. Quote, I have often walked down this street before, but the pavement also stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. It was silly, but it passed the time. The Hueys began their descent. A large paddy loomed in front of us. No gunships this time. A thick jungle extended towards the east. The choppers hovered a couple feet off the paddy, and we bailed into the mud. The squad spread out in battle formation and approached the tree line. So far, so good. No reception committee. We fanned out a little more and began our sweep of the area, looking for caches of food and weapons, being very careful of the ever-present booby traps. Occasionally, it felt pleasant to be under the shade of the jungle canopy. It had to be 15 degrees cooler in there. We had just emerged from the tree line and were almost in the middle of a little clearing, when suddenly the sound of the jungle were interrupted with popping and crackling, the unmistakable sound of the AK-47, the VC weapon of choice. Another ambush. We all hit the ground, diving behind whatever cover was available. Suddenly, the guy in front of me was down. I could hear his screams. Medic! Medic! I'm hit! Sarge's radio operator directly behind me also took a hit. Leaves and trees overhead were being shredded by automatic weapons fire. He was hit badly. A medic had crawled over and stopped the bleeding, but he needed a medevac right away. Sarge crawled over. Give me that radio, he shouted. He called for a medic. The medevac answered and said the gunfire was too intense to risk coming down. Sarge turned bright red and told them either get down here or risk the chance of being shot down by Sarge himself. They responded, came in under fire, and extracted the seriously wounded. Then, just as quick as that, the firing ceased. The VC broke off the engagement and disappeared into the jungle. A couple of Cobra gunships appeared overhead, but there were no bad guys to shoot at. The VC had hit us and run once again. I laid there for a while, covered with dirt and sweat, wondering why the man right in front of me was hit, and the platoon RTO directly behind me was also hit. Wondering why I was spared.
So the next story, they just received word over at Firebase Moore that 2,000 Vietnamese were headed their way. So Sarge got my dad out there with the rest of them. They head off to meet them. They got a plan that they would meet him at this ditch. My dad would shoot a flare in the sky and then run towards the howitzers and hopefully get protected. Anyway, my dad's like, not having any of that. I'm going to shoot this flare up and just lie in the ditch. I'm not going to head back towards the howitzers and get blown up by my own guys. So anyway, it turned out it was a false report anyway. They never saw the 2,000 soldiers, but they were ready for battle that night. And anyway, read the story, and hope you enjoy it.
Chapter 8, Tracks. Armored personnel carrier, a track-driven military vehicle designed to transport troops across a track. 105 howitzer, artillery support for U.S. troops. Claymores, anti-personnel mines used by U.S. troops. Every third night, we pulled base security. The company's other 2 platoons would take their turns guarding Highway 4 from 3-man position in the paddies or in the jungle, and we would spread out around the perimeter of the fire base. Around the perimeter of fire base more, and guard the base camp from 3-man positions inside the bunkers. Somehow, it felt a lot safer behind the barbed wire and the claymores and the sandbags. We still rotated watch, sleeping for 2 hours and watching for 1. That gave us about 6 hours of sleep, 2 at a time. But we slept a little sounder in the relative safety of those bunkers. We all looked forward to those nights at base camp. Watch went a little faster with a cooler of Dr. Pepper nearby. Most of those nights passed uneventfully. Except for 1. We were on perimeter security that night. We had already fanned out in the bunkers and were just about asleep when we were awakened and informed by division that there was trouble somewhere out in the darkness, and we had been appointed to the response group. Swell! We woke up everyone in camp. All the cooks and all the supply and all the maintenance people moved out to man the bunkers, and the rest of us scrambled around to gather up our ammo, our flak jackets, our extra belts of M60 rounds, a couple extra grenades, and an extra LAW, light anti-tank weapon or 2. Move out! The tracks were almost here. Let's go, let's go. It was Sarge. We checked our squads and waited in the darkness with hearts pounding. Tracks? Nobody rode in tracks anymore. Not here. The armored personnel character, proper name for a tank, for a track, had been one of the greatest boons to infantry mobilization, allowing rapid deployment in Europe. But here in Vietnam, the abundance of landmines along the road precluded their use. Hitting a landmine meant blowing the metal floor of the track right into the troops inside, thereby providing the VC with shrapnel to maim and kill our troops. We could hear a faint squealing around sound coming from the east, growing louder and louder. It was the distant sound of tracks screaming down the dirt highway. We fanned out in little groups. Climb up on top and hold on. Sarge's voice boomed through the night. We jumped on the closest track. This is insane. There sure wasn't very much room on top of the track, and certainly not much to hang on to. 6 or 8 of us tried to untangle ourselves and grab onto something. The engine gunned, and we were off, hustling down Highway 4 into a moonless night. In the Disneyland terminology of the day, this was definitely an E-ride. Everything I had ever ridden on or prior to this had wheels. Turning was more or less smooth maneuver. Even a Brody was smooth in comparison. But each time this track changed direction it cornered on a dime, playing crack the whip with everyone topside. One of us could have easily been dislodged and knocked off and left alone in the middle of the night to fend for himself. With fear mounting with every mile, we bumped and lurched down the highway, destination unknown. After about 30 minutes and almost a dozen arm-wrenching turns later, the tracks came to a sudden halt out in the middle of nowhere, next to a huge, dry riverbed. We jumped down and tried to get our squads together. The moon was just ascending in the sky, shedding a little light on the eerie scene. Along the dike in front of us, outlined in the moonlight, were 18 to 20 105 howitzers with their barrels leveled down to the dry riverbed. Their gun crews busied themselves changing and stacking the ammo. After a few moments, a captain came over and motioned to me. "Sergeant, bring your RTO man and follow me." He explained that intelligence had reported a very large group of North Vietnamese Army regulars making their way through the area. It was going to be our mission to stop them. He pointed out the row of some 20 howitzers now being loaded with beehive rounds. We followed the captain out about 100 yards in front of the leveled guns, where he showed us a shallow bomb crater, gave us a few vague instructions, and with a tense "Good luck, Sergeant," left us there to save all of the division. The howitzers were loaded with beehive rounds, anti-personnel rounds with thousands of razor-sharp curved arrows and swarm and swirl when shot, slicing and dicing anything within range. The RTO man looked at me and asked, "Good luck? Aren't we going to need a little more than luck, Sarge?" We looked at each other. Somewhere out in front of us, some 2,000 North Vietnamese regulars were headed down the same steam bed toward us. And to our rear were some 20-odd howitzers, all loaded with beehive rounds. The captain's plan was simple enough. As soon as the regulars wandered within range, we were going to pop a signal flare and sprint for the howitzers. Then, when we were clear, the howitzers would open fire on the NVA. We decided that running towards the howitzers, closely pursued by NVA regulars, was a totally insane death wish. With their lives on the line, protected only by the decimated infantry platoon, the gunners would no doubt panic and most assuredly open fire on us. So if we didn't want our families stateside to receive letters of condolences and posthumous military awards, our best bet would be to pop a flare and then hunker down in the bomber crater, and hopefully we weren't discovered by the NVA or by any stray shrapnel from the beehive rounds. Now a full moon was just beginning its nightly journey across the sky, lighting up the steam bed with a ghostly pale glow. Our eyes strained at the horizon. We were both wide awake. Neither of us could sleep this night. Sheer terror prevented our eyes from closing. As it turned out, no one showed. We had waited all night for nothing. Not that we minded at all. At dawn, division called off the operation. The phantom NVA army never materialized. So now, with our chance of glory all gone, we returned once again to Firebase Moore and the humdrums of guarding good old Highway 4.
So the next mission my dad wrote about here is called Point, the name of the chapter. They were sent to basically destroy some food caches that were out there in the jungle to make sure that the enemy didn't have food supplies. But it was a very dangerous situation. My dad had a guy in his platoon named Johnson. I think his actual real name was Barnes. I'm not sure about that, but I remember him talking about a guy named Barnes that led his platoon as the point. So he was really good at his job. He knew exactly what to look for booby traps. And on this particular mission, you'll see he actually did save my dad's life, as the entire platoon would have been blown up if it wasn't for this guy. So they were out there. The second lieutenant said, "You need to keep going, try to find that food." My dad's like, "It's not here. We need to get back because it's too dangerous." And he wanted to, send Johnson or Barnes out there basically to risk his life for no reason. So my dad wasn't too happy about that. And so he basically said, "I'm going to go with you. We'll have 2 points." And so you'll see in the story what happens, but they basically come within inches of dying. And it kind of woke my dad up. I mean, not woke him up, but, his distaste for the political aspect of the entire offensive there. It was just a chessboard game to this second lieutenant. He didn't care anything about the lives of these men, where my dad did. He was there as, a man of integrity, trying to, go to war for the right reasons. And he didn't feel like he was treated right. And, a lot of the people that came back from Vietnam felt the same way.
Chapter 9, Point. Point, the first man down the trail in a military formation. Early warning device for higher-ranking Army personnel. Surely the most difficult job in the entire infantry is walking point. The point man has to be the eyes and ears for his unit. Whatever happens to the unit happens to the point man first. Tripwires, booby traps, and ambushes lurk down every jungle trail and behind every bamboo hut. And only the most skillful of point men lasted long. Traditionally, we took our turns walking point. It was a dangerous job, and that way we all shared the danger. However, in our unit, it didn't work that way. Our point man had a name. Johnson. Nobody ever knew his first name. He was just Johnson. Johnson was one in a million. He was a bright, bespectacled 19-year-old from Vermont with sandy hair, a proper New England accent, a very agreeable personality, and an uncanny sense, an awareness of the jungle and its inhabitants like no one I ever met. He was walking point for the squad when I came in country, and as far as I knew, he was still walking point when I rotated out. The whole time I was squad leader, Johnson was our eyes. We tried trading off once or twice, but Johnson felt uncomfortable with someone else doing his job. He had grown up hunting in the White Mountains of Vermont, so he was familiar with the sights and sounds of the wild and felt most comfortable as point. So since no one else much wanted the honor, Johnson took the job. One day I got to walk point with him. The second lieutenant in charge of our platoon had ordered us into a known Viet Cong infested area. Viet Cong infested area, translation, ambushes, mines, and booby traps. There was no thought on the lieutenant's part about the danger to the men under his command, and never did I ever see him in any forward location. He was always back in some safe spot, giving directions over the radio. He was in his early 20s and kept pretty much to himself. So, not really knowing anyone under his command, it was easy for him to casually order us off to face death. Well, supposedly, huge caches of food had been stashed away somewhere in the area, and our mission was to seek out this cache and destroy it. As we cautiously approached the trail, Johnson pointed out a tiny stick of bamboo protruding from the mud with a small piece of paper attached. There was a short warning in Vietnamese. "To die," roughly translated, meant to die. The trail had been marked for the local Vietnamese farmers, warning them that the Viet Cong had booby-trapped it. I immediately radioed the lieutenant, who, as usual, was back in some nice, safe area. I explained the danger Johnson faced, and the lieutenant nonchalantly told us to go right ahead and please keep him apprised of what we found. I argued, but no use. It was sure easy for him to order us to risk our lives. I talked with Johnson. I couldn't just order him in. It just didn't seem right. What if something should happen to Johnson? How in the world could I live with that for the rest of my life? Finally, I told him I'd go in with him. 4 eyes better than 2. To this day, I'm not sure what possessed me to do it. I had been in scary situations before, but nothing like this. Visions of booby trap victims flashed across my mind. I had to shut them out. Concentrate on what I was doing, or I'd surely end up like them. Slowly, we inched our way along. The chance of a sniper in the trees or even an L-shaped ambush on the jungle floor posed a real possibility. But the greatest and most obvious danger was from booby traps. So our eyes focused on the ground and bushes just in front of us. The rest of the squad followed as best they could, walking carefully in our footprints, single file, at a safe distance. Suddenly, Johnson froze. So did I. Something wasn't right. We sensed it, but didn't know just what it was. Neither of us moved, our eyes straining the jungle. Nothing. We saw nothing. Then, almost by chance, Johnson glanced down. There, within inches of my right boot, hidden in a bush, were 3 Chinese grenades wired together. He pointed them out to me. Then he smiled and shook his head. Slowly and carefully, we backed out of the area with the rest of the squad in our own footprints. We had barely escaped almost certain mutilation or death. We had been inches away from death, and for what? Our lives in exchange for a few bags of rice? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that Johnson and I were a lot more valuable than that. Johnson and I sure thought so. Strange how war can warp a person's thinking and distort the value of a single human life. Accomplish the mission. That's what he deemed important. But at what cost? Looking back now, after raising a wonderful family and teaching school for almost 30 years, those bags of rice seem terribly insignificant in the scheme of things. To the lieutenant, we were expendable. If he lost us, someone else would be sent out to take our place. Someone else for him to move about on the great chessboard of war. Fortunately, another squad had discovered a cache a few moments prior to us finding their grenades. So I called the lieutenant, apprised him of our success, and we cleared the area. I think that was the beginning of a growing schism between the lieutenant and me. Our goals in life were altogether different. And all I could think from that moment on was getting out of there and going home. I never knew why Johnson stopped that day. He had no logical explanation either. I'm just glad he did.
So as my dad trudged through all the mud and jungles through Vietnam, he picked up all kinds of viruses and fungi. In fact, even after coming home and having a family, he always had a sore on his leg, and he just called it his fungus leg. Like I remember coming home one night and someone hitting him with a cane on accident in the shin, and he had a sore there for months. Just it never healed properly, and it was always his bad leg.
Chapter 10, Fungus. The climate in Vietnam is just about perfect for growing things. Lush foliage, crowds, the jungle, and every type of flower and plant flourishes. Even fungus grows well in Vietnam. My encounter with fungus began with sores from being in the muddy paddy water too long. My right ankle was totally infected. It had swelled up and turned bright red. And after a while, I couldn't even get my right boot on. I had mentioned it to Sarge, hoping to get a couple days off so it could heal a little. He looked at me incredulously, like who would take care of my squad if I did that? What kind of sissy was I? Warriors can take a little pain, etc., etc. I got some hydrogen peroxide from the medics and with an eyedropper squirted it onto the open sores. Then watched as the white bubbling pus oozed out onto a sterile gauze pad. In the midst of this, word came down from division that some GIs had been taken captive and were being transported to North Vietnam through Mar sector. We set out down Highway 4, covering the area cast of paddies between the firebase Moore and the next firebase to our due south. I laced up my left boot, but my right ankle was so swollen and filled with pus that I couldn't even slide my right boot on. So I left camp with a boot on my left foot and a thong-like sandal on my right. I stayed pretty much on solid ground and tried to coordinate my squad's movement. It was slow going. My foot kept slipping out of the sandal and into the mud. At long last, we reached the other fire base. We had found nothing, not a trace of the captured Americans. My foot throbbed. I propped myself up against a tree and tried to clean an injured foot. As I was dropping the hydrogen peroxide into the wound, a captain from that fire base happened by. "What are you doing, soldier?" I explained how I needed to be with my men, etc., and how Sarge expected me to tough it out. "Soldier, if you don't get medical attention right away, you're in danger of losing your foot." He reached out, helped me hobble down to the medics, who cleaned it up a little and put a big gauze bandage over the sores. Then he put me in his own Jeep and had his own driver chauffeur me back to the medics at Firebase Moore. I was a little apprehensive. After all, Sarge was expecting me to be out with my men. But the captain had ordered me to have it looked at and taken care of. And sergeants are outranked by captains. Most sergeants. So I limped over to the medic tent, pushed back the door flap, and ducked in. Surprise! There on the examining table in front of me sat Sarge. And it wasn't a social call either. When he saw me, he actually blushed a little. My chauffeur conveyed the captain's orders to the medics and left. Nothing was ever said between Sarge and me. I think he finally realized how badly I needed medical attention, and I knew I would never again have to be embarrassed about seeking medical help, and that it would probably be the best to never mention anything about our surprise meeting that day in the medics' tent.
So the box chapter is about my dad and Johnson go out there and they find basically a bomb out there. They weren't exactly sure what it was, but they were going to blow it up with some C4. And so anyway, it talks a little bit about that and the safety of it all. But ended up, they cleared it, and Johnson almost blows himself up in it. He comes back, ears ringing, like, "Sarge, I quit." So, just day in the life out there in the battle.
Chapter 11, The Box. C4, a white plastic explosive used by U.S. troops. Blasting caps, metal detonation device used with C4. We had been out slogging through the paddies all day, again searching for a cache of food and weapons. The rain had stopped for a while, and we were beginning to dry out. The paddies were extremely wet, and travel there was next to impossible. So, where it was absolutely necessary, Johnson brought us out of the mud and led us down the paddy dikes. One day, our dike led Johnson to a little wooded area. Suddenly, his hand went up. Instinctively, we all knelt quietly. He motioned for me to come forward. As stealthy as I could manage in combat boots, I crept forward. Just 15 to 20 meters in front of us was a little clearing, and just at the edge of the trees was a rather large metal object. There didn't appear to be any activity, so we spread out and secured the area. Johnson and I went in for a closer look. "Don't touch it," Johnson said. "It might be booby-trapped." The Viet Cong just loved to leave tempting items around for GIs to discover. They booby-trapped everything, even our dead. None of us was about to touch the box. "Let's blow it, Sarge," suggested Johnson, who proceeded to lie in a few sticks of C4. Yes, not only did he walk point, but Johnson was our demolition man as well. In addition to his regular gear, Johnson also carried a satchel of white plastic explosive, C4. I carried the blasting caps in a strap on the side of my helmet. Rule was no one ever carried both caps and plastic explosive. Actually, by itself, the C4 was very safe. Heat had no effect on it. In fact, when you couldn't get it, C4 far exceeded sterno as a heating source for cooking rations in the field. I gingerly handed him a blasting cap, and he proceeded to hook everything up. Go on back down the dike and I'll catch up, he suggested. I'll take cover behind the little mound of dirt over there, and after it blows, I'll find out what we've got. I motioned for the squad to turn around and move out. We left Johnson with the box and walked back down the narrow dikes we had come in on. We had gone about 100 meters when all of a sudden a monster explosion sent concussion waves through the air, knocking us all off the slippery dikes into the paddy. Behind us, there was a towering plume of black smoke hundreds of feet in the air. Then it started raining mud, big gobs of gooey mud. I jumped up on the dike and sprinted toward the smoke plume, yelling, "Johnson! Johnson! Johnson!" Mud was still falling. As a figure emerged from the smoke, he was walking slowly, holding his ears and shaking his head back and forth. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Johnson. Johnson was alive. Seeing me, he wobbled over in my direction, removed his helmet, threw it in the mud, and yelled quite convincingly, "Sarge, I quit." As it turned out, the little mound of dirt had saved Johnson's life. That box that we thought contained food or clothing must have contained nitrate, a common fertilizer used by Vietnamese farmers and common ingredients in Viet Cong bombs. We were all a little shaken, but eventually everything got back to normal, and in a few days, even the ringing in Johnson's ears finally subdued.
All right, I'm back. A little change of venue here. Got a painting of my dad right here. This is one that that hung in the office of Mr. Philip Ostergaard. And my dad loved painting. He's done a lot of paintings for a lot of different people. In fact, if there's paintings out there that are hanging or not being used, our family would like to get them back at some point. To keep in the family, just to keep my dad's memory alive. Or if you guys are going to keep it up at your house, keep going. And we love to, if you're going to honor him that way, that'd be great too. But if it's sitting in a garage and you're not using it, feel free to give it back to us, because we like to hang wonderful paintings like this whenever possible. So thank you. And then let's get back into it. So the next chapter is about the lieutenant. My dad did not like this guy. In fact, he basically did not belong in the military at all. He was a hippie guy. He basically joined the ROTC in order to avoid the draft. Anyways, somehow he got as a second lieutenant in charge of my dad's division over there in Vietnam. And he basically was playing chess with men's lives. My dad really, really got after him. So you read here as part of this story about how he basically was playing turkey with them. They would send him on a patrol and just in the middle of a mud patch, and there's no protection. And basically they're just trying to see where the enemy was. A couple of our guys would get shot, and then they throw artillery at the trees, see how many guys they could kill. It wasn't fun. So anyway, my dad had a few choice words with him. In fact, he's like, "We're going to take it behind the building here, and we're going to duke it out," basically. Eventually, got him in a little bit of trouble. The second lieutenant said that my dad volunteered to be a spy up north at one point, which obviously my dad's like, "I didn't do that." So after discussing it with some of the other commanders involved, the second lieutenant finally was dismissed, taken out of there, which, it was great for everyone else, because he was just risking their lives for no reason. So hope you enjoy this part of the story.
Chapter 12, The Lieutenant. Hippie, a member of a 60s movement that was anti-war. ROTC, a military course available to college students. ASAP, common military term meaning as soon as possible. Most men I met in Vietnam I had respect for. After all, we were facing the same dangers day after day. Perhaps we didn't see eye to eye on everything, but most of them I respected. Except for the lieutenant. I never knew his name either. We just called him Lieutenant. I had only one extended conversation with him. He had heard that I was into music and lyrics, so one night he asked me to peruse his poetry. They were hippie poems. My lieutenant was a genuine, card-carrying, make-love-not-war hippie. What was he doing in Vietnam? And in the infantry? Turns out he had joined the ROTC in college to avoid the draft and had been assigned to bookkeeping and payroll and had become a qualified payroll clerk. Then, through some colossal blunder, been put in charge of our infantry platoon and sent to Vietnam. Not only was he not ready for his new job and totally clueless about all this, but he was totally inept and a chicken to boot. But enough about his good qualities. This was the man who had put my life and the lives of every squad member in jeopardy multiple times. One day, he went way too far. It happened one day while we were out in the paddy playing Target. Now, Target is a game played by at least a full infantry squad, a major or lieutenant colonel in a observation helicopter, and any number of Viet Cong. The game is played like this. The infantry guys are dropped off in plain view in a large paddy or clearing. After fanning out across the paddy, they approach one of the tree lines. The idea is to draw fire from the VC in the tree line, at which time the major or lieutenant colonel, who has already called in the grid coordinates and gotten clearance for firing, directs artillery fire down on the poor unsuspecting VC. When the smoke clears and the shooting stops, the major or lieutenant colonel directs the remaining squad members into the tree line to see what he had bagged. It must have been that the officers would get credit toward their next promotion depending on the body counts in the tree line. Of course, they would have to factor in a large group of wounded VC who probably limped away and the many dead who were spirited off by the survivors. Why, by the figures on TV at home, I understand we nearly killed off the entire male population of North Vietnam. Twice. Obviously, for us infantry types, this was not one of our favorite games. One time, it was totally ridiculous. We were deposited in plain view in the midst of this huge, really muddy paddy and told to fan out and approach the tree line. I called back and informed the lieutenant that the mud was past knee deep and it was impossible to maneuver. We wouldn't even be moving targets. But instead of doing something to help us, he yelled over the radio from his nice, secure location to put our point man, Johnson, further out in front to draw fire. I tried to explain that we were going after Johnson if he was hit and that we needed to be close enough to help him. The lieutenant screamed on the radio over and over. I refused to put Johnson at any further risk and turned off the radio. The mud got worse, thigh deep in places. At long last, we plowed our way to the tree line. When we extricated ourselves from the mud and crawled exhausted onto the dike, we couldn't believe our eyes. All along the whole front of the tree line were bunkers, heavily fortified overhead with 6-foot thick bamboo tree trunks. They were cleverly camouflaged with mud and growing plants. Just one VC with an old World War II bolt-action rifle could have taken out the whole squad at a time. It would have been a turkey shoot with us wallowing in the mud. There was no way mortar or artillery fire could have saved our lives. We would have all been dead. I turned the radio back on. The lieutenant was still yelling. They had ordered us out. No, we weren't going to waste time blowing up the bunkers with no chance for a body count. They just left the bunkers intact, ready for another game of Target with some other squad, some other day. That's all they cared about our lives, literally using us as bait. The lieutenant was livid when we got back to the safe area where he was, As soon as he started, I lost it. I can't remember being that angry before or since. I explained in very clear terms how he didn't have to walk point, how I felt about Johnson, how all of us felt about his utter disregard for our safety, and finished up by inviting him out behind the command post for a physical demonstration of how displeased I really was. I explained that if he would take off his lieutenant bars, I would be more than happy to take off my sergeant stripes for a brief man-to-man, man-to-lieutenant discussion. I think I probably should have gone ahead and punched him out. Fortunately, he was chicken, and I had time to review my priorities, one of them being gone at home at the earliest possible date. Back at base camp the following morning, a messenger announced that I was wanted at the command bunker by the first sergeant, ASAP. Wondering just what he might want, I entered the bunker and took off my hat. Sergeant Lunney, I understand that you have volunteered for LRP duty, beginning immediately. No way, Top. Never happened. I didn't think so. The lieutenant had signed me up for long-range patrol LRP duty, effective immediately. LRP duty is surveillance duty in North Vietnam. It consisted of a midnight drop-off of a 2 or 3 man team somewhere in the north. Their objective was to radio back troop movement and deployment. Amazingly, they kept needing replacements. I told the first sergeant, no thanks. Then I sat down with him and he told him everything I knew about the lieutenant. I told him about everything that had been happening between the lieutenant and my men. I explained the first sergeant that there was an excellent chance he would get fragged by one of the members of his squad. By the end of the week, transfer orders came down from the division, and they weren't for me. The lieutenant was gone.
The chapter on socks is basically what you would expect it to be. They're basically walking around in mud all day long with wet feet and getting, bad fungus on their feet, all constantly wet. So there was this one time where they were hoping to go home that night. The choppers were coming in, Huey landed, but there's only one Huey. They're like, that's probably not, we're not leaving tonight. So they did deliver some socks though. So they enjoyed a night out with the dry socks, and they all had their boots off. I mean, if the enemy attacked, it wouldn't have been good, but they dried their feet out that night. And anyway, there was a lot of complaining, and once the socks got there, they really they were fired up. So.
Chapter 13, Socks. Sea rations, canned food with still delicious from World War II. P39, the official issue number of the Army's can openers. Grunts, affectionate Army slang for infantrymen. Griping is part of daily life in the Army. It sort of comes with the territory, and there's plenty to gripe about. The unrelenting monsoon, the mud, the mosquitoes, the food, and the bone-tired weariness. It didn't take much to get us started. Almost anything could set us off. We were about to go on a mission that would provide us with ample opportunities to practice our favorite pastime. Most of our patrols involved Highway 4 in some way or another. Either we were guarding it by night, patrolling it by day, or by doing a sweep in the neighborhood patties. However, this patrol was different. We were coordinating with some other units, cordoning off a larger sector, trying to cut off and trap a good-sized group of VC infiltrators. We had been out on the patties for over a week. Our unit wasn't used to this, and the extended patrol was beginning to take its toll on troop morale. In addition to our regular gear and extra ammo, every man had to carry a week's supply of sea rations. So our packs were usually heavy and the straps cut into our shoulders. But even that wasn't the worst part. Whipping out our P39 and opening a cold can of ham and limas for breakfast and seeing the little chunks of white fat floating around the pale yellow sauce was enough to cause the kindest person to complain. Actually, the worst part of the week-long patrol was the condition of our feet. Our mission had kept us in the paddies most of the week, and constant contact with water had rendered our feet almost useless. The skin on our feet, after being soaked in paddy water all week, had puckered and shriveled. By now, the folds and wrinkles had begun cracking, and bloody sores were forming. It was not a pretty sight. We had plenty to gripe about now. We set up that night on a long side dike. Everyone was footsore and tired. We hadn't found the VC, so the week was pretty much a bust. What a waste. Our feet were a mess and morale was at an all-time low. In the distance, we heard the sound of a chopper. Multiple choppers meant extraction and returning to the comforts of base camp, such as they were. A single chopper spelled resupply. More sea rations and stuff to carry around the paddies. We weren't going home this night. More long days in the unforgiving paddy mud. Everyone groaned in disbelief. The griping began in earnest. There was no way we were going to spend another couple of days on our feet. A couple of grunts went out and offloaded a single cardboard box, and the chopper lifted off. The way they were carrying it, we could tell it wasn't heavy sea rations. They carried it to the dike, and amidst great curiosity, popped it open. It was socks, dry socks, and some news. They couldn't get enough assets to extract us tonight, so the first sergeant did the next best thing he could. He sent us socks. Suddenly, the griping stopped. A cheer went up and echoed across the paddy. Brand new, green, dry wool socks. Enough for everyone in the platoon. That night, we slept and did our watches, bootless, in our stockings, feet, thankful to be going back to base camp in the morning, and tonight for brand new, green, dry wool socks. It's easy to complain, and oftentimes it's the little things we take for granted. I know I never have been thankful for dry socks until that night. My year in Vietnam taught me many things. Being thankful was one of them.
The Cobra gunship was nothing to play games with. It's part of the United States arsenal in Vietnam. It had just been adopted by the Army, and it was a weapon of choice. Good to have it on our side. Unfortunately, this day, you'll read here in the story, they got bad intel, and the gunship turned, and they started firing on my dad's platoon. He ended up jumping and diving and saving Johnson at one point. They go rolling down the ditch, and eventually they were able to call off the attack. But, just another crazy war story of miscommunication and daring adventure.
Chapter 14, Cobra. In Vietnam, one of the biggest and baddest weapon systems for the United States had in its arsenal was the Cobra gunship. It was armed to the teeth. There was no room planned for passengers, only for payload. Its weapons included an M79 grenade launcher in its nose, a minigun mounted on its belly, and rockets mounted on little winged projections on its side. It was a perfect support unit for the ground troops. Formidable? You bet. Many Viet Cong ambushes were called off or cut short because of the threat of a Cobra showing up. They would hit us and run, trying to escape before the Cobra showed up. As an infantry sergeant, there was no more beautiful sight in the world than a Cobra gunship on the horizon. It was a relatively new unit when the Vietnamese War began and proved its worth time and time again as the war progressed. My one close encounter with a Cobra, however, was a bit too close for me. One night, through some lack of information, we found ourselves on the wrong side of a Cobra shootout. We had been out all day looking for GIs that had been captured by the Viet Cong and were being transported to North Vietnam for propaganda purposes. They were headed for the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was our assignment to cut them off. We had cordoned off the area and had them trapped in a Buddhist temple. Quickly, we called for backup and got the temple surrounded just before dusk. Word came down we were staying there for the night, so make the best of it. We set up on the dikes. At least tonight we wouldn't be in the mud. We ate our sea rations cold and stretched out on the dike, awaiting our turn for watch. We had them trapped and didn't want them to get away. Johnson drew first watch and was a 30 or 40 meters down the dike, watching. The rest of us were trying to get some sleep before our turn came up. It wasn't quite dark yet, and I was sitting there talking with the rest of the squad. Suddenly, we heard the distinctive purr of the Cobra's rotors and looked up to see one on the horizon, heading our direction. Now, the U.S. tried not to make enemies among the South Vietnamese, our allies. So why did the captain order up a Cobra? What was he going to do? Smoke their brand new temple? While we were wondering, the Cobra went into a deep dive. He was about to make a strafing run straight at us. We all scattered looking for cover. Everyone, that is, but Johnson. For whatever reason, he couldn't hear us and didn't see the Cobra headed right at his position. He knelt there intent on his watch. I sprinted down the dike and tackled Johnson. We slid off into the paddy and on the left side of the dike. Simultaneously, several rockets plowed up the paddy on the right side. We scrambled up the dike and sprinted back to our RTO man, yelling for him to get on division's frequency and tell idiot Cobra pilot that he was shooting up the friendlies. Evidently, someone had misinterpreted our location information and the pilot had mistaken us for the VC. Fortunately, they got a hold of the pilot and called off the, quote, support. Johnson was the lucky one this night. If the Cobra had used the minigun, he probably would have got us both. And if we hadn't jumped into the left paddy, those rockets would have chased us into the right paddy and got us there. Surely, God was watching over us.
Well, we're celebrating the 4th of July here, and this next story is a classic 4th of July over in Vietnam. The troops were really excited to, celebrate. They got a big party. They had all this meat. Barbecues were going. And unfortunately, a lot of the guys were getting drunk, which, typical. But it turns out my dad was one of the only guys who was awake at the base camp, like the only one there. And everyone else had passed out. He couldn't even get them to wake up because of all their partying. So if they had come that night, it would have been bad. But my dad was out there on patrol, kind of protecting the entire camp at that night. A couple other stories, not the 4th of July, but my dad always talked about his ice cold Dr. Peppers. That was one of the highlights he had there. And he would always get a big block of ice delivered there, and he would take it and he would spin the Dr. Peppers on the big block of ice to get them cold. He had his little private stash in his room or in his barracks, and he always had Dr. Peppers on hand, which is, I don't know, maybe that's why I like Dr. Pepper, I don't know. But anyway, that's how he kept them cold, with those big blocks of ice. And yeah, they had a great celebration that night on the 4th of July, and he was the only one awake.
Chapter 15, the 4th of July. Independence Day, July 4th. And here we were halfway around the world at Firebase Moore, a few hundred feet from Highway 4 in South Vietnam. Sure seemed like a strange place to celebrate the 4th, but we tried to make the best of it. The morning passed by rather uneventfully. Most everyone took the opportunity to have a leisurely breakfast and maybe a second cup of coffee. There were no assets that day, so we were stranded in base camp with no sweeps, no assaults, and no patrols on the schedule. There were no games of target, no search and destroy missions, just a quiet day of relaxation. Those didn't come very often. A lot of guys slept in until noon, For me, it was a good chance to catch up on my letter writing. The letters I got at mail call today would get quick answers. Oh, yes, there were the normal card games. Being so close to the first of the month and payday, some of the guys, predictably, were out losing all their next month's money to the company card sharks. Some people never learn, and when you tried to help, you got answers like, I could get killed tomorrow, so what good is that money going to do me then? I might as well have some fun. Or, so what are you, my mother or something? Well, that was usually the thanks you got. Then through the whole month, the guys would be trying to borrow money just until payday. They were pretty young, away from home for the first time, and totally out of control. Some of them were so bad that they were out of money by breakfast. Others lasted clear to lunch. One of our supply people, those not smart enough to be trusted with a loaded gun and go on patrol with the regular infantry guys, had found a strange contraption buried beneath whatever it was they were inventorying. It turned out to be an Australian shower, an aluminum shower head that screwed on and off, connected to a rather large canvas bag. We rigged it up with 3 2x4s and a pulley at the top. Supply let us have some ponchos, so we draped those around for privacy and confiscated half a dozen or so ammo pallets to keep our feet out of the mud. When you turned camp up, you lowered the bag, filled it to the brim with water, hoisted it up, and tied it off. The trick was to keep from using too much water while soaping up, because you would need all that water a little later to wash off the soap and acclimated muck. Clean, what a glorious feeling. We ate a light lunch and lounged around for a while, watching the first sergeant do his thing. Top wasn't the warrior type. Now he knew how to take care of his men. Clouds of dust began forming in the east, headed in our direction. Not to worry. It was Top's army of army trucks filled with food for our 4th of July celebration. A virtual mountain of sodas and beers were stacked next to the command bunker, cases upon cases upon cases. Late in the afternoon, tubs of ice appeared from nowhere to cool down the drinks. The final touch, 55-gallon drums split lengthwise, filled with lumber and briquettes and fitted with makeshift grills. We waited as the fires roared and waited anxiously for the cooking coals to settle in. Somehow, through his connection in the U.S. military command and the people he knew back in Saigon, the black market, the first sergeant had procured boxes and boxes of steaks, more than enough for everyone in the whole company. There were even leftovers we couldn't finish. If you closed your eyes and took a deep whiff, it wasn't hard to imagine you were home in your own backyard, celebrating with your family and friends. At last it was time. The cooks brought out the barbecue sauce, and in no time at all, we were feasting on grilled steaks, barbecued beans, hot toasted garlic bread, and ice-cold drinks with watermelon for dessert. It was hot, and the sodas went quickly. Ice-cold sodas really hit the spot on a day like this, and soon the supply of sodas ran out, leaving only the beer. Well, I was a little annoyed because I didn't drink beer. But then I had my own little supply of Dr. Peppers in the bunker, so it worked out. As the party continued and darkness began to fall, the celebration widened to include the firing of weapons into the air by the very drunk. Evidently, the overabundance of beer was having its effect, so I decided to curtail my celebrating and spent the rest of the evening in the safety of my bunker. Little by little, the shooting and the shouting subsided, and the hummed sound of the cicadas and other distinctive sounds of the Vietnam night drifted across the paddy, reminding us of just where we really were. After an hour or so, I decided to check out my squad and be sure everyone was okay and ready for watch. Not quite. They were all passed out, every one of them. Some on their bunks, some on the ground behind the bunkers, and some who hadn't made it that far passed out over by the barbecue pits. I was unable to wake any of them. Rifle in hand, I made a short walking tour of the perimeter. With the possible exception of the radio operator in the command bunker, I was the only one awake in the entire camp. If the VC had mounted a raid that night, they would have easily overrun us. It was a frightening possibility. I returned to my bunker. I didn't get much sleep that night. Instead, I sat up on watch with my M16 locked and loaded, lying on my lap.
The next story, called The River, is one I had never heard before. It was actually interesting because there was a joint task force between the Navy and the Army, and my dad was part of that, in which they actually boarded a barge, went down, up and down the river, and if they saw an enemy, they would attack it. The barge would come down, the lift would come down, the soldiers would come running out, try to stop the enemy, jumping right into mud. So once again, it wasn't the best of plans. But he talks about that here, his one day of Navy battle.
Chapter 16, The River. 50 caliber, a Big Daddy machine gun firing a projectile the size of your finger. RPG, rocket-propelled grenades, sort of a portable bazooka. In the Army's attempt to keep troop morale high, they worked very hard at our mail service. Normally, mail would arrive from the States in about a week to 10 days, keeping us somewhat current on news from home. We all looked forward to the daily supply chopper that found us no matter where we were in the whole south of South Vietnam. We all looked forward to the daily mail call. It was the highlight of an otherwise dull day. I'm sure Dave never knew how much his notes and letters meant. I know I couldn't possibly imagine all the special trips to the post office at all odd hours of the night to provide me with a touch of home. I still have a box with all his correspondence in it up in my closet at home, some 35 years later. But there was one letter I wish I had never come. Over a period of time, I had become painfully aware that Beth had stopped writing altogether. I decided to write her again. She was probably busy with school, etc. I would write her once more and wait. I wrote her one more time and waited. Nothing came back. Days became weeks. Weeks turned into months. I couldn't sleep at night. 3 long, agonizing months crawled by, and then, Dear Gary. It was the dreaded Dear John letter. She was seeing someone else and hoped we could still be friends. I cried most of the night. I know I didn't sleep. It was over, and I hadn't known it or had a chance to do anything about it. Half a world away. I was a basket case for about a week. Finally, it dawned on me that I had better quit moping around, get a grip, and pay attention to what I was doing, or I might just go home in a bag. So, best I could, I tried to forget about us and put it all behind me. Of course I couldn't, but I did try. One day at mail call, rumors were flying. In the Army, there are always rumors. Rumors about assignments, rumors about troop movement. There were even rumors about the VC. Well, part of this rumor came true. Rumor had it that Division might be assigning us to River Patrol. Everyone was super excited. We would spend our days sitting down in a nice boat instead of mushing through the rice paddies. We would be living on a nice, clean Navy ship instead of living in a muddy old base camp, and sleeping in Navy berths with cotton sheets instead of on rancid canvas cots. Not only that, but we would be taking our meals shipboard instead of in the Army mess tent. Hey, it was tough duty, but someone had to do it. After several days of rumors back and forth, word came down from the division. We were to report for River Patrol training. There was a lot of cheering and a lot of backslapping. Finally, a good assignment. They trucked us down to the docks where we would find our ship. Well, it wasn't exactly a ship or an armored speedboat. We would be riding around in a barge, a converted World War II landing barge. But hey, this still wasn't so bad. Riding beats walking any day. Besides, if this old barge had made it through Normandy, it would probably see us through river duty here on the Mytho River. We left the dock and began down the river in search of the bad guys. It was good old Army OJT, on the job training. As we traveled, they began the orientation. First, a warning. Stay away from the shore side of the boat because VC in the area had Chinese RPGs, a small shoulder-fired missile that had a delayed detonation device, which would blow the metal side of the boat into whoever happened to be standing there. Swell! Now the Navy was supplying shrapnel for the VC. Next, they explained how river patrol works. Basically, they checked out the river traffic. Our mission was to provide support for the naval personnel who would stop, board, and search suspicious boats and barges. We were just there for backup. That sounded easy enough. Backup's not that hard, especially with two 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the middle of the boat. This was shaping up to be good duty. So far, so good. Sometimes we took small weapons fire from the bank. That was the main reason we were aboard. As soon as they identified the source of the weapons fire, they would wheel and turn the barge in that direction, gun the engine, and motor right at the shoreline. As we approached the shoreline, they would put the ramp down and we would charge out with 50 caliber shells flying overhead for covering fire. Now that didn't sound so good. In fact, it sounded rather dangerous. However, we were assured that this was standard operating procedures and it always worked out no problem. So we practiced it. The boat wheeled around and motored. The engine gunned. The ramp plopped down and out we charged into waist-deep mud. We literally couldn't move at all. It was the Navy's version of Target. As we chugged back to the docks, we looked at each other, thankful that this wasn't the real thing, and we hadn't charged into blazing AK-47s and machine guns. Our new friends helped to extricate us from the sucking mud and back into the boat. We looked at each other. We had just seen the downside of river patrol. Now we were headed back to our plush new home out of the mud. When we arrived at our berth, we were instructed to wait right there on the dock. We weren't really sure why, but hey, we would wait for all the Navy luxury. Suddenly, from high above us, two giant sea hoses started to hose us down. Mustn't bring any nasty mud aboard the nice sparkling Navy ship. The spray from the powerful hoses nearly knocked us down. Finally, we were no longer muddy, just very wet. Next came a very sad announcement. Someone up the chain of command was in deep trouble. Imagine putting Army personnel on a ship. There was no example. No one had ever done this before, so they sent for trucks to drive our nasty gear and us back to Firebase Moore and the mud.
So after months and months of trucking around through the mud, my dad finally got out of the patrol and into the mortars area where his friend Robertson had finally been sent home. He's able to take over his position there. And he was so thankful to be there. He was, with his whole old platoon, he would always buy them drinks and Cokes and everything when they were returning back. And then he finally met with someone else, a big Samoan dude that he had met earlier, and happened that he was in charge of the ice. So, you know, like I mentioned before, he would get these giant blocks of ice, and this was his contact. And every day he gets that big old block of ice and roll those Dr. Peppers.
Chapter 17, Mortars. FDC, the Fire Direction Control Center, the mortars command bunker. Azimuth, direction in degrees from one point to another. Short, Army slang for not many days to go. R&R, a 1 week in-country vacations for U.S. troops. After I had been in country for a couple of months, Robertson's turn for R&R had come up. His problem was that the captain couldn't let him leave because no one else in the mortar platoon was trained and qualified to do Robertson's job, run the Fire Direction Control Center. The CO asked around, trying to find someone to take Robertson's place. Turns out I was the only one in the entire company with the training I had received as an NCO at Fort Lewis, Washington. So while Robertson was off in Vung Tai enjoying himself, I got a week off too. A week out of the mud. Running the FDC for the mortar platoon was fun compared to traipsing around in the mud. I basically had most of the day off and spent the night listening to radio frequencies in case someone needed fire support. When a call came in, I would plot the target's location on the grid, figure the azimuth, direction in degrees, and the distance. Then the crew would aim the tubes, put the proper charges of gunpowder on the projectiles, and wait for clearance to fire. It felt good to be giving our guys much needed fire support. I had been on the other end a few times, when mortar fire or artillery rounds got us out of a tight situation. What a glorious week. But too quickly it ended and Robertson returned. I went back to the mud and severely depressed for weeks. Back to the regular routine of ambush and sweep. Days dragged into weeks and weeks stretched to months. Replacements came and went. The guys in my squad who had finished their tour in Nam rotated home, and magically replacements came to take their spots. It was a little hard to understand that I would still be there in the rice paddies getting shot at while my friends were home with their families, back at school, or pumping gas at the corner gas station. There were always replacements. It seemed so impersonal. A guy would rotate to the States or get himself shot. A replacement would show up and the Army would go on about its business of war. It didn't seem to matter to the Army. The war would simply continue, using for fuel people's time and people's lives. After 4 or 5 months slowly passed, Robertson was getting short. He was about to rotate out. They had sent for a replacement, but nobody came. Finally, another infantry sergeant, as green as I had been, was infused into our unit. So the captain replaced me with the new E5, putting him in charge of my old squad and replacing Robertson with me. This time, it was a permanent assignment. I couldn't believe it. Out of the field? What an emotional relief. No more games of target in the paddy mud. No more tripwires down jungle trails. No more airborne assaults. No more patrols or ambushes. No more boot-sucking rice paddy mud. My chances of returning home had just greatly increased. The constant dread of facing death every day had been lifted from me. I was relieved and thankful. For the first couple of weeks or so, I really did a guilt trip on myself. Every time my old squad returned from a day sweep, I'd have an ice chest of cold sodas ready for them. I was so thankful for my new assignment that I thought it was the least I could do. But then, over time, we gradually went our separate ways, doing our separate duties. Plus, I was running out of money for sodas and ice. But I never would forget how it was to be out of the field. One day, I was on my way to lunch. I heard a familiar voice. It was the PFC. We had met when we both came in country at the training command. He was a great, big, friendly Samoan who was now walking with a noticeable limp. Shrapnel, he replied, but I'm out of the field. He added cheerfully, been assigned to battalion mess. He said that he came by our camp every day. I guess I had been out on patrol and we never bumped into each other. He then noticed my empty ice chest. What do you do for cold sodas, Sarge? Drink 'em warm or scrounge ice when I can afford it. He smiled. One of his spheres of influence included ice delivery. So nearly every day thereafter, he would stop by the bunker with a block of ice perfect for rolling Dr. Peppers. I had cold sodas for the rest of my tour. Sometimes it really pays to have good friends in high places.
So the medal story I kind of hinted at earlier is about his accidental hit of sinking an enemy ship with a mortar fire. He just guessed the azimuth and the distance to it. And I guess a helicopter pilot actually saw him hit it. So anyway, he was awarded with a medal. And at the end it says, no, I'm not going to get it out and show it around. Well, I am. So here it is. This is his for military merit. And again, this is the medal he received for that mortar, the sinking of the ship action. He also has some machine gun, rifle, infantry. He was a marksman, so that was a cool one. And then just some of his other, the small, I don't know what they are, but they tell his rank and things like that. I'm sure people in the military would recognize these things. So there you go, with, dog tags and all that cool stuff. So we have all that, which I'm very thankful for. Also in this section, he mentions some letters, he's been saving all these letters. Well, guess what? I found them. Here we go. We have the Sergeant Gary B. Lunney letter collection. Wow. Yeah. All these people who love my dad sent in mail. I was just cruising through it. I mean, of course, Dave Carson is in there. I saw some from Arm and Mass Camp, Bob Coulter, multiple people. So I'm not going to go through all that right now. That'll be a fun time. Maybe we'll just do that someday, huh, Matt? Anyway, and also I found the original old floppy disk in that same file. This is the original story that he started writing this book about his stories in Vietnam on our old Macintosh SE back in the day. So that story originated on there. And then this is actually the first copy of the Vietnam book right here. We have a folder filled with all the tales. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the production of the of the book. And again, this chapter about the medal, he was embarrassed about it, I guess, but I'm proud of him. I mean, that's awesome, dude. All right.
Chapter 18, The Medal. Up on the shelves in my closet is a rather large box containing nearly all the memories I have of Vietnam. I've kept most everything. There are shoeboxes filled with letters from my friends and snapshots they sent of all that I missed during my 1-year stay. There's a special place for all the letters that Mom sent, and multiple piles of rubber banded together the letters from good old Dave, a significant part of those collection. Somewhere beneath all of that are the 2 plastic cases that contain my medals. Most of them are pretty generic in nature, and everyone who went to Vietnam got a minimum of 2. And since I had no intention at all of remaining in the service, I really have no occasion to wear them. So they stayed in that box for over 30 years. On the other hand, had I stayed in the service, those medals would have become more valuable to me. You see, medals are very important for symbols for real Army men. At parades, gatherings, and various formal functions, servicemen wear them as evidence of their prowess, as a record of their bravery, and the very proof of their manlyhood. I have no such collection of medals. There is one in the box, however, that is not generic, and of that one I am proud and a little embarrassed. You see, I got it quite by accident. We had moved from the rather safe fire base moor with its bunkers, miles of wire, and hundreds of claymore to a wide spot in the road. Actually, a wide spot on the paddy dike near Can Gyo. The fire base without protection, a sitting duck out there in the middle of several rice paddies, was a wonderful target. And it wasn't long before the locals tried their luck. We had set up the mortars, plotting exactly where we were. Then we went over to the artillery and helped them get squared away. Next, we worked on the fire direction control bunker. We had just brought the walls and ceilings over and got them assembled when we came under fire. Suddenly, mortar rounds rained down upon us. Everyone dove for the cover. There were already 2 guys in my little foxhole by the time I got there, so I ducked into the FDC. I grabbed my compass, shot an azimuth to the muzzle flashes, and made a wild guess about the distance. We armed several projectiles and fired. The incoming fire ceased abruptly. Now that doesn't sound like anything heroic or out of the ordinary, just a soldier reacting in a manner in which everyone expects a soldier to act. I simply returned fire. However, as fate would have it, I had a witness to my heroics. A helicopter passing by witnessed the entire event. Evidently, we were receiving fire from a rather large dugout as it floated down the nearby river, and my return fire struck them amidship. I sunk the boat and the mortar and its crew, a moving target no less. Now, this is hard to believe, I know. That's why I'm a little embarrassed about it. But the chopper crew insisted. So a couple of weeks later, to the tune of a live military band, the captain and the fire sergeant assembled the entire company and trotted me down the aisle and up onto stage to award a special medal. And so, for one in a million shot, briefly, the 9th Division had a begrudging hero. No, I'm not going to get it out and show it around. Thank you.
So the fire mission chapter is one that my dad actually never mentioned to me. I just found out when I was reading it because it is so tragic. They were requesting support from my dad and the other mortar people, and they weren't allowed to fire because they had to get clearance from both the U.S. command and the Vietnamese command, and they got clearance from the U.S. guys, but the Vietnamese wouldn't clear them. I guess it was too close to a friendly village. And so they just had to listen to their friends basically dying. So it is definitely a sad story. And then turns out the clearance that was supposed to be given by the Vietnamese officer was a spy and a part of the Viet Cong. So one of the sadder stories in this book. But why did my dad put it in here? It really helped him when he put it to pen and wrote this book, just to, help him mentally deal with the post-traumatic stress and all that he had to go through. So it was just part of his healing process, and just to get it out there and to show, the rigors of war and what it really, really meant. And it wasn't a good time.
Chapter 19, Fire Mission. Fire mission is a request to fire in support of our troops or the South Vietnamese. Chinese Claymore, a homemade anti-personal mine made by impeding glass, nails, gravel, almost anything you might find to insert in a 2-foot circle of C4. Running the fire direction control center for the mortar squad meant working strange hours. We monitored the radio 24 hours a day. If anyone needed fire support in our sector, we were there for them. Most day fire missions went to the artillery or helicopter gunships. We were mostly needed at night when there was heavy VC movement in our sector. When a fire mission came in, I would immediately plot out the map, the intersection of the grid coordinates, where the longitude meets the latitude. Once I had pinpointed the exact location of the VC, I would shoot an azimuth from our location on the map to the target and call the angle in degrees out to the guys manning the 381 millimeter tubes. Next, I had to compute the distance to the target in meters and find out the correct elevation of the tubes to produce the proper trajectory. Finally, I'd call out the amounts of powder bags the crew would need to put out on the projectiles. All of this sounds very complicated, but with all the charts and measuring devices that our experienced crew had, it happened rather quickly. The last thing we usually had to do was get permission to fire, first from the U.S. command and then from the ARVN, the Vietnamese command. This was necessary because they always plotted the location of all Vietnamese and American troop movements, so we wouldn't be firing on our own guys. We were called on many times to provide fire support for our troops, but of all those fire missions, the one I remember most vividly is the one when we were denied permission to fire. It was a night like most of the others there in the Can Gyuk, warm and pleasant. The evening patrols had already gone out. I had begun monitoring the radio and not much was happening. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire and yelling interrupted the night. Someone was on the radio and in big trouble. Immediately, I recognized the callers. It was one of our platoons from our own base camp. Guys we knew. We could hear the screams of the wounded and dying, the crackle of AK-47s, and machine gun fire. We verified the location, got the tubes ready to fire, and clearance from the U.S. command, but we were refused clearance from the Vietnamese command. Our platoon had been ambushed just outside a so-called friendly village. It walked right into homemade 50-pound Chinese claymore, and we couldn't get clearance to fire, supporting or suppressing fire on their behalf. All we could do was listen to their screams for help, helpless to respond. Gradually, the shooting subsided, and they withdrew to the safety of the nearby jungle, carrying with them the wounded and dying. As the battle broke off, I went outside and sat on the sandbag ring around one of the mortars. We were all shaken by the experience. Some of the mortar platoon had friends out there in the darkness and went inside the FDC to listen on the radio as they withdrew. I don't know how long I sat there with my head in my hands. All I could think of was, it could have been me. If I hadn't been transferred to mortars, I could have easily been in charge of the ambushed platoon. All I could think of was the troops that would not be going home. Guys had hopes and dreams just like I had. They had plans for the future just like I had. Dreams and plans now shattered. I was overcome. What good came of their deaths? What purpose could there possibly be in their dying? Oh, no doubt their families would receive some nice medals, a crispy folded flag, and a piece of paper telling their mothers how nobly their sons had died. But for what? They had simply become disposable fuel for the machine of war. Replacements would come, their body bags would go home, and the war would go on. That night has stayed with me all these years. A tragic footnote. Later, we would discover that the Vietnamese officer who would have given us clearance to fire and perhaps save some of our men was himself Viet Cong. He was later identified and executed.
During his time in Vietnam, my dad met this guy named Tibber Rosso, and he was part of that the mortar squad. In fact, he was an E8 NCO, which was above my dad. My dad was an E5 going on E6, it says here. But I guess this guy was amazing. He could fix anything. I guess there's this old 50 caliber machine gun sitting in the warehouse no one knew how to fix. And so he pulled it out and he rigged it on there, made basically a mobile mortar traveling. They could go anywhere and launch their mortars anywhere. And then he mounted the 50 caliber in their barracks. And I guess one day he actually saw some enemy troops approaching. He was about to fire on them, and then he looked in the scope and recognized that there was actually U.S. soldiers headed towards him. There was a lost squadron out there, and so they came in safely under the. They almost got blown away with the 50 caliber, but again, this guy Tibor Rosso taught my dad a whole bunch. He could basically fix anything, and. This guy, Tibor Rosso, taught my dad a whole bunch. He could basically fix anything. And he talks about meeting up with him or talking with him after his time in Vietnam. And it was just good to hear his voice again.
Chapter 20, Tibor Rosso. Starlight Scope, top secret night vision device, night binoculars. FDC, Fire Direction Control, the mortar's headquarters. One of the most amazing men I've ever met in my life, I met in Vietnam. He had a squarish, stocky build with thinning gray hair and flashing blue eyes. He must have been about 45 years old. I was 28. He had been born in Hungary just before World War II. He grew up an orphan all over Europe in camps for displaced persons. He lived through some tough times, taking care of his sister, though you could not tell by his calm, even manner. Somehow, at the end of the war, he and his sister immigrated to the USA, becoming citizens. He was so thankful to the US that he dedicated his life to soldiering as his way of showing his appreciation. His name was Tibor Rosso. Sometime after I had been transferred to mortars, Sergeant Rosso was assigned an E8 NCO in charge of mortar command. None of my duties changed, but since he was an E8 and I was only an E5 going on E6, some of the responsibilities shifted. I still ran the FDC, but he spelled me at night, and that was welcomed relief. But then everything changed. Tibor was a real go-getter. The first thing we did was build a portable FDC. He stole a truck from somewhere, went down to the army dump, and confiscated all the wood he could find, including dozens and dozens of ammo crates. We built wooden walls that could be disassembled and carried on a truck and reassembled at future location. We fixed the corners so they would interlock, made all the walls, the ceiling, and the doors quite life-safe. Last, we filled up bags and stacked them for protection around the FDC. Tibor and I had our own traveling bunker. Folding cots were built into the walls. There were new chairs and a table to sit at where we were plotting the fire missions outside the FDC bunker. Tibor built even more of those sturdy chairs and tables so we might entertain in the early evening. Because of the street smarts he developed growing up in tough times, Tibor had a definitive pack rat side to him, collecting nearly everything he ran across. When supply ran out of shovels to fill their sandbags, the place to go was to mortars. We had shovels. If anyone had anything, it was the mortars. Once, when the coffee supply ran out, even at division, Tibor casually invited the captain down to the mortars to share a cup or two of freshly brewed coffee. Once the food at mess tent was less than appetizing, Sergeant Rosso got a hankering for some LRP rations. Developed by long-range patrols where the normal canned rations were just too heavy to carry, the LRP rations were dried foods and were ultra-light and easy to carry. When they were rehydrated with hot water, the LRP meals were some of the best tasting rations in Vietnam. Tibor called me into the bunker like we were going on some famous mission or something. He gave me an order in his accented English. Sergeant Lunney, go over to supply and steal some LRP rations. I nodded and walked over to supply. I knocked on the front door and waited. Soon the supply sergeant appeared, and I told him about the LRP rations and Sergeant Rosso's desire for a couple of meals. Sergeant Rosso looked pleased when he saw me coming, victoriously carrying a whole case of LRP rations. He greeted me with that broad smile and then wry grin as he asked, How'd you do it, Sergeant Lunney? There was a look of genuine disappointment when I told him how I asked for the rations. Sort of took all the fun out of it. The rations were delicious, and we avoided the mess tent for almost a week. Sergeant Rosso was the most knowledgeable Army man I ever knew, and it paid huge dividends. Once he came across an old 50 caliber machine gun in storage. When he asked why it was being stored, they told him it was broken and no one knew how to fix it. Tibor brought it triumphantly to my old bunker and mounted it right up there on top. What a gun. He mounted it on the huge tripod right on the edge of our perimeter. Anyone attacking our area would pay big time. The slugs were bigger than my index finger, and it had a broken starlight scope he had also found that no one knew how to fix it. But Tibor disassembled it all over the FDC and slowly put it back together, piece by piece. One night, all of this tinkering paid off. We would hear some noise in front of us. We knew we were being probed. The problem was that we didn't know if it was just the locals come to shoot us up or the NVA regulars, in which case we were probably going to be overrun. Someone was out there all right. We cracked the mortar tubes up almost straight up so that we could give ourselves covering fire. If they got too close, we would lob mortar rounds all around the perimeter. In the midst of this worry and preparation, Sergeant Rosso did one more thing. He got out the starlight scope. Sure enough, there were troops zigzagging toward our direction. Then Sergeant Rosso stopped. Their helmets were all wrong. Those were U.S. Army helmets. We all held our fire. Sergeant Rosso called division, and sure enough, there was one squad lost out there in the jungle. They had called in, but had no idea where they were. We knew. They were zigzagging toward the muzzle of a fully operational M50 machine gun. Finally, we made contact and walked them into our perimeter, where they got a good night's sleep. Some of them were totally unaware of what Sergeant Rosso had saved them from. I've always wanted to see Tibor once more. I knew that he lived in Dearborn, Michigan with his sister, and I tried to contact him. I only got his sister, who spoke English about as well as I spoke Hungarian. Just recently, I did come in contact with him over the internet. It was good to hear his voice again. It brought back so many memories of our brief stay together in the Vietnam conflict so many years ago.
So one of the things my dad liked to do over there during his free time in the barracks was to play music. So he had a guitar. He wrote music while he was over there in Vietnam. He wrote the song that a lot of people have performed here at Rio is Born with a Purpose. I'm not sure if he wrote anything else while over there. My sister Lindy would know. But Matt, if you could show everyone a picture of my dad on the back cover of the book, there's this really cool picture of him playing his guitar, sitting on some barracks, and just playing music. This particular story of Christmas was on Christmas Eve, and I guess there was some squadron pinned down, and he was the guy on watch duty that night in the command center on the base, and so they finally got back, and they all went to bed, and he's out there playing his guitar on Christmas Eve under the stars and just singing Silent Night, Holy Night, and the music really got him through the hard times, in Vietnam, also back here. So it was something that he held on to, even like later on in life when he got Parkinson's and it was hard for him to draw, to write. He could still sing, and that guy, music, he couldn't even put a sentence together at the end there, but you started singing a song and he'll sing the entire song. So definitely music has, a way of penetrating the soul, and it meant everything to hear him sing there at the end, even playing piano up till, just a few years before he passed. But music is amazing, and I'm very thankful for all the talent he had and he shared with everyone here at Rio, through the band, through choir, and all that.
Chapter 21, Christmas. Ambush Alley, a very small base camp named appropriately for its street location. Christmas had always been a special occasion as I grew up. Santa always made regular stops at our home every December the 25th. Even in those early days when he also brought the tree, which was left over on some dark tree lot, he brought everything as well. We did get pretty regular mail delivery out there in the paddies, and I wasn't going to let a little war interfere with my Christmas, a long-held family tradition. Mom had sent a box of stuff. There were envelopes that obviously held Christmas greetings and Christmas cards. There were even a few small packages I had squirreled away under my bed in the FDC. Everything was packed neatly and in the cardboard box awaiting Christmas morning. I had been up most of the night. Sergeant Rosso had gone out with the infantry company on Christmas Eve, and despite the Christmas truce, had been caught in a firefight. They spent most of Christmas Eve pinned down. By the time they were lifted out and flown back to Ambush Alley, it was 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. Tibor was exhausted and went right to bed. So I stood watch all Christmas Eve. It was now 6 o'clock in the morning as I quietly pulled out my Christmas box. I picked up my $10 guitar and went out to the sandbags, where I wouldn't disturb anyone. I sang a couple of quiet Christmas songs about peace on earth, goodwill toward men, and I specifically remember Silent Night, accompanying myself on guitar, as Franz Gruber must have done so long ago. I opened and read each handwritten card or note. I discovered a little tin of fruitcake in the bottom of the box and various little gifts. There were several cards from Dave. My folks sent me the rhyming dictionary that I wanted and had packed it with Toll House cookies, my favorite. Actually, by the time I opened the box, a letter description would be Toll House morsels. A better description would have been Toll House morsels. It was obvious that they had encountered some bumps in transit, but they sure tasted wonderful to me. It was a very special morning. Shortly, Tibor awoke, and I laid down to rest. When I woke at noon, I showered and shaved and put on some pressed fatigues and walked down to get some lunch. The cooks had outdone themselves. Christmas decorations hung about the tent. They had airlifted in some fresh cooked turkeys, bursting with hot stuffing. Bowls of cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes and gravy, veggies, and hot homemade rolls swelled the serving line. There was even pumpkin pie for dessert. For the moment, all those nights and smells made us forget where we were. All those sights and smells made us forget where we were and what we were doing, and reminded us of Christmases past, of our loved ones gathered around the tree, the little ones unwrapping presents, and the family home for Christmas dinner.
So the last couple chapters, there's only about 2 weeks left in his deployment. They were sent him back out of the, he called it the ambush alley, and to a safer zone. But it turned out it wasn't even that safe. They actually got ambushed while he was there during the last 2 weeks. I guess there was some Viet Cong that had infiltrated the base. Turned out it was the barber. He could have, shaving people. He could have sliced their throat at any time. But yeah, it was a scary time. I guess other people in the barracks, like the cooks even, were shooting around, anyone that moved. So my dad took his rifle, put his back against the sandbags, and he just sat there, praying that no one would come in. When the dust settled, I guess they had blown up a couple Hueys and other things like that. But his goal at that point was just to survive, get home safely the last couple weeks there. So the last chapter, it talks about him flying home, hopping in the Flying Tiger. And I don't know if you caught it at the very beginning of the book. On his way out, he actually saw a sign there that mentioned getting a free steak dinner, and he ends the book with that. Come get your free steak dinner, and I thought it was a cool way to end the book. Thanks, Matt, for doing this. Again, happy 4th of July, everyone. I hope you enjoy learning more about my dad and this book. I do have a PDF copy. I could send that to Matt. He could post it for anyone who wants to actually read it on their own, or any of the pictures. I'm sure we can get those to you guys. So again, thank you. Have a great 250th America, and God bless America, and God bless every one of you. Thank you.
Chapter 22, short. DRO, date when you were to rotate out of Vietnam. Sapper, specially trained infiltrating demolition crews. I had been faithfully crossing off days on my calendar for over 6 months, and I was now getting extremely short. About 2 weeks before my departure date, I was transferred from our little base camp in Ambush Alley and assigned to Big Safe Dong Tam, the home of the 9th Division. I didn't much like the size of Dong Tam. In our other base camps, we basically knew everyone in our sector, and once inside the wire, felt pretty safe. Here in Dong Tam, there were hundreds and hundreds of Vietnamese that were hired to do the laundry, the sanitation, and other menial jobs. They all had passes and were checked in each morning and checked out every night. But there was always the danger of VC infiltrator getting in, like the guy they caught pacing off the distance between buildings and making a map of the local VC mortar crew, for the local VC mortar crew. But I suppose the promise of cheap labor far outweighed the danger of infiltration. I guess my year in country had changed my mind a lot about the Vietnamese, from one of acceptance to one of mistrust. The only thing on my mind was stay alive, get home. In Dong Tam, I played at our company's main barracks, counting the hours. I pulled light duty during the day and guard duty at night. Everything was great until the night the sappers came. Sappers are suicide demolition crews sent to blow up anything that looked unguarded. They penetrated our perimeter one or two at a time to set charges on planes and choppers. The night they came out in force came as a total surprise to the huge U.S. base camp. Explosions lit the sky. At first, it sounded like the world was ending. Plastic explosives ripping the darkness. What was really frightening was all the cooks and supply people rushing around with loaded guns. Hundreds and hundreds of guys with absolutely no combat experience locking and loading. I sprinted to the company bunker, went to the far end, put my back against the sandbags, and pointed my M16 at the entrance. I didn't intend to come to this far and have some rookie take me out. The commotion lasted for about 40 minutes. Base security had isolated the sappers and were mopping up. The cooks and supply people were still chasing each other in the darkness. It was bizarre. Finally, morning came. At the airstrip, they collected the bodies of dead Vietnamese, cleared away damaged aircraft and choppers, and tried to make sense of the night's activities. Throughout the rest of Dong Tam, most everything else went back to normal. The one notable exception was the barber shop. It remained closed, and it wasn't until late afternoon that someone figured out that out of the barbers who had been shaving the top brass yesterday with those nice sharp straight razors were lying in a nice straight row in their own body bags next to their sapper friends. I moved a cot into the bunker and spent my last nights in relative safety. The days crawled by until finally we passed through the final checkpoint and boarded our Flying Tigers jet for our journey home. Sitting in my window seat, I looked out at Vietnam for the last time. I was filled with mixed emotions. Guys I knew were out there right now, risking their lives. I ought to be out there with them, but there was no way I was going to get off that plane. I had come, done my duty for my country, and now I was going home. A year had passed, a whole year of my life. Gone, and for what? Had I made Vietnam a better place? Were the oppressed infants free? Hardly. I had come here with such high ideals, but in reality, the Vietnamese people never knew or cared. They were happy just to be left alone, farming their ancestral paddies as their fathers and grandfathers had done for centuries. With all our bombs and guns, we could not force upon them a different way of life. In vain we tried, in vain we died, and now for me, it was over. I leaned back and went to sleep. The jet, with its load of Vietnam returnees, thundered into the night. Chapter 23. Home again. We touched down in Oakland in the middle of the night. What a feeling. I made it. I made it home. All the sleepless nights, laying in ambush, all the scorching hot sweeps, the firefights, the helicopter assaults, all of these were memories now. It was all over, and I was home. The hour was well past midnight, but I wasn't the least bit tired. We offloaded the Flying Tiger, met up with our duffel bags, and bussed back to the immense hangar that had once been our staging area when we departed a year ago. They directed us to a bunk area. I tossed my duffel bag on one of the beds and wandered back outside to savor the evening. The moon, the same clear starry night I had beheld halfway around the world, seemed somehow more peaceful here in Oakland. I had spent a many night looking up into the sky, wondering if I'd ever see home again. Now I was home. Suddenly I thought, my appointment. I had made a mental appointment a year ago, and I meant to keep it. It was weird, but I recalled just where I had to go. The mess hall looked dark, but the one door was open, and there was a single light on in the back. The sign advertising a steak dinner for all Vietnam returnees still hung over the service area. Anytime, day or night. "Hi, soldier," came a voice from the darkness. He was wearing a white chef's smock and had a cook's hat on. "Yeah, I'm back. I came for my steak." He smiled. "How would you like it cooked?" "Medium, I guess." I really couldn't believe it. Here was this guy on duty for this special purpose, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. He brought it out a little later with a salad, a drink, and some fries. My first fries for a whole year. I thanked him again and again. He just smiled. I sat there alone in the semi-darkness, eating my steak and thinking back over the events of the last year. And thanks God, I was home. So is the tale of Sergeant Gary B. Lunney in Duty Calls. I know it's been a rather long podcast. I really thank you for sticking with me. If you made it this far, I'm sure you guys had to divide it up a little bit, which is more than understandable. Trust me, it's been a full couple of days here in real time doing this. So an absolute privilege and an honor. And as I say kind of many times when I dive into this podcast, I am not a wealthy man. I don't have a whole lot to offer. but I really enjoy providing episodes like this one specifically. Gary Lunney was a special man, and he represented so many great Americans who stepped forward, picked up the rifle, and you could say what you want about the different conflicts that we've been through and the wars, or whatever. It's not about all that. It's about the people who served. And today on Independence Day, this 4th of July weekend, I am extra grateful for people such as Mr. Gary Lunney. I think we've said all we needed to say. It's been a long episode. One final thing, Mr. Lunney absolutely loved his Dr. Peppers, and unfortunately, I just ran out of time, or I'm not sure. I was looking for some old school Dr. Peppers, thinking that would be a fitting way to end. But instead, we're going to go with Dad's root beer, a little American flag on it. And he talks about that steak at the end. And this one's for you, Coach. I know how happy those sodas made him in Vietnam, so we're just going to leave that one there for Coach Lunney. And thanks for tuning in, guys. Dad's root beer. This is a tribute also to the Lunney children, for your dad. And our coach, our teacher, Gary Lunney. This has been an honor. A few years in the making this happen. Now I just hope everything works. Went through, transferred, the sound was okay, so that we don't have to do it again. But I just want to say, happy 4th of July, everybody. God bless the Lunneys. God bless Gary Lunney. And may God continue to bless the United States of America. Happy 4th, guys.